dude.
No,
it's legal in my state too.
It's not in mine, and my boss is a crazy person, so that's all. But if you do it, I won't say shit, and I just will continue on.
Oh, I think we might be. Yeah, we're live.
We're live.
Yeah, I just pressed the button.
Shit.
Hi everyone, we're back, sort of. I don't have my nice camera hooked up just yet. 1 second, let me plug it in. It's like I said, it's one of those days. Thank you for bearing with me. This is how I know you really love me, or something. There we go. Oh, it automatically. Oh, yes, that's so much better, isn't it? Let's just get this positioned. Hello, everyone. Yeah, did everyone make it over to the new stream? Yes, we did. That was fun. It sounded like there was a very small helicopter inside my computer. It was like... It's stopped now. I'm not sure if it's broke or not, but it's a 10-year-old computer, so I've been ready for it to go at any second for a while now, I guess. Been preparing for that moment. But yes, here we are. Just may give a few minutes here for everyone to make it over. 48, 49 viewers. We were at about like 75. So, I see people have ordered some Sanri. Did I tape a baseball card to the fan? Hey, Joe Magician. I thought you said you had a dinner date. Joe Magician. I invited Joe to come on and chat a little later, but he said he had some sort of dinner engagement. But,
yeah, right.
But Gretchen Ellis, a.k.a. Niana the Wise, will be jumping on a little bit later. Yeah, exactly. It owes me nothing. 10 years, exactly. It's definitely put in its time. But yeah, Gretchen will be jumping in, like I was saying on the aborted stream that we just did. We have about 45 minutes of scripted stuff to finish up the Grey King revision, and then we're going to be let's see. Okay, yeah, Joe's making excuses. It's okay, Joe. Don't worry about it, man. It's cool. You know, jump in whenever. You're always welcome, Joe. In any case, we've got a little bit of scripted material to finish up the episode, and then we're going to go to what I really want to get to, which is discussing with Amanda and Gretchen and Sanri some of the ideas about how this Grey King mythology might play out, what it might mean. This is what people always ask me about is, so what are the actual Dawn Age events? What really happened? Where did they fight? And all that stuff. So we're going to get into some of that. We're going to talk about what the symbolism that we've decoded might actually mean in practicality. So that'll be fun. But we are, for now, going to finish up the Grey King and the Sea Dragon. We're going to honor more patrons. And we're going to, by the way, I've gotten so fired up doing this Grey King and the Sea Dragon material again that I essentially have picked up a draft that I was working on a long time ago, which was going to be Weirwood Compendium 2. It was going to follow up Grey King and the Sea Dragon, and instead I chose to go a different route because Grey King and the Sea Dragon basically opened up many different lines of inquiry, and so I had several choices about where I wanted to go for the next episode. And so I went with the Burning Brandon and the Garth stuff, which led into the Odin and Yggdrasil stuff, which is obviously really important. But we also need to get back to all these burning sorcerers that are emerging from the burning tree and what that has to do with green dragons and wildfire, which is green fire. And because obviously, if we're looking at the intersection of fire magic and Weirwood magic, which is what the Grey King mythology is all about, we've got to consider the symbolism of green dragons and wildfire, which is green fire. So we're going to do those things. So that is a way of saying that the next episode, actually, instead of being another Signs and Portals episode, I'm going to go ahead and call it Weirwood Compendium 5, Sea of Green Fire, although it will kind of dovetail with the Signs and Portals stuff that we're doing because it's all interlocked like that. So in any case, just a preview of what's going on. We're going to basically continue with all the stuff we're talking about today, either next week or the week after. I'm not sure which, when I give you the next episode, which will be Weirwood Compendium 5. So what I will tell you is that you would be wise to brush up on the Weirwood Compendium after today. That's kind of one of the reasons why I'm doing Weirwood Compendium 1 over again, is because I want to encourage everyone to get into this material. I feel like the Weirwood Compendium might be the most esoteric of all the stuff that I've done. It's not quite as accessible as the Green Zombies or the series about the Others, for example, but it's probably the most important, because the Weirwoods are really at the center of the story. If anything it's the Weirwoods and the Green Seers. And so to understand that, there's just a ton of stuff we have to get into. So I would encourage you, after we do this one today, to do Weirwood Compendium 2, 3, and 4 in the next week or two, because we'll be following up with Weirwood Compendium 5 very soon. Bobby Sperry is flattering me shamelessly by asking me if I would ever think about publishing these essays in an ebook or as a PDF. Yes, Bobby, I've been thinking about that. In fact, I've got all kinds of wild ambitions to write books and get book deals. So you just stay tuned and keep giving me money, and good things will happen.
Bobby's great, by the way. I met her at IAFCon. Super sweet.
Oh, did you? She's a longtime patron of mine. That's awesome.
Yeah, she's super great, and I believe she was with her husband, and they were awesome. They totally made my day. First print I sold. Just shout out to her. So go ahead.
Super shout out.
Yay!
Thanks, Bobby. Yeah, she is, like I said, she's been over a year, maybe a 2-year patron even. She's been a very long time patron, so.
She's great.
Totally. Yeah. And by the way, let me just say something quick about my patrons. Guys, if you ever have to cancel or step down your donation, I totally understand. And just know that I am grateful for anything that you guys send my way. And please don't feel bad at all. Like, I'm just unbelievably blown away that people send me money to do this stuff. And, if you can do $5 a month or $10 a month for a little while, and then things change, or you want to give your money to someone else and support someone else, like, Maester Mary or Amanda, that's totally cool, dude. I understand. Sometimes people send me a little message when that happens, and they'll say, hey man, I love you, but I'm looking for work right now, or hey man, I love you, but shit changed. And just know that I really appreciate those notes. That does help a little bit. It makes me that way I don't pop it up and be like, oh man, I lost a patron, what happened? And I quickly check my messages to see if I didn't respond to somebody's message or something. So I love all you guys, and I appreciate what you send in. And if you have to step down your donation or cancel, it's totally cool. I absolutely understand. And if you could send me a little note, that's always appreciated too. So that said, we're going to dive into the Weirwood Crown. I do not have flamenco music for you because of the computer issue. So I'm just going to read the patron names without flamenco music, and you'll have to imagine. But I will use a dramatic reading voice. So this next section is called the Weirwood Crown, and it is brought to you by our newest member of the Long Night's Watch, the Smiling Wolf, Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, Jedi of Just Ice, he who waits the Corn King, as well as our newest Zodiac patron, Durin Durndon, the Red Fish Bluefish, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Pisces, whose eyes are ruby and sapphire and whose sword is pale fire, and our beloved Mallory Sand, Storm Witch, the Hand of the Dragon, rider of Zulfric, the Black Beast, and now guardian of the Celestial Galley, a.k.a. the Weirwood Submarine. Oh, look at that. Pretty nice synergy, huh? I made you the guardian of the galley, and then I realized that, of course, would be the Weirwood Submarine.
It's beautiful. I love it
the
so
Celestial
much.
Galley. Oh, it is. It's perfect synergy. So.
And did you hear Amanda's dog howl right when you said the shout out to my dog? Zulfric is Barrick, basically. That's his fantasy RPG name.
Nice. We sent out the Twilight Bark, I guess, didn't we?
Yes, we crossed dog dimensions, or something just happened there. So
Nice.
the
Cool.
the stream is strong in this one.
The stream is strong. Yes, this is a much better stream than the first one. The first one was beset with woes and ills.
We were set along a new path. 'Twas the right thing to do.
Yeah, I got myself a Red Bull, and now we're humming. All right, guys. So this section I left off last time, and the last paragraph, I'll just read it again. The point of stealing the moon seems to have been the possession of the fire of the gods, and all three of these myths, the Sea Dragon, the Storm God's Thunderbolt, and the Azor High myth, seem to possess that very fire. The Grey King. Actually, no, I take it back. When I said all three, it was talking about. Oh, here's what I'll do. I'll back up a couple paragraphs. Here we go. So, All right, here we are. So after exploring the weirwood symbolism of the sea dragon, we have several parallels emerging between the Grey King, Azor Ahai, and the Green Seers, and they raise some interesting questions. First and foremost, who was it that broke the moon? If the slaying of the sea dragon was a story about a moon meteor, then the Grey King is the one who slew the sea dragon, and so doesn't that make the Grey King the moonbreaker? He also called down the fire from heaven in the storm god's thunderbolt story, which would again put him in the position of being the moonbreaker. But if the hammer of the waters was a moon meteor called down by some group of treacherous green seers, that would make the green seers the moonbreakers, right? And then there's also that fellow Azor Ahai who has a thing or two to say about breaking moons. Isn't he the moonbreaker? So what's the deal here? Who actually broke the moon? Well, the point of stealing the moon seems to have been possession of the fire of the gods, and all three of these people, the Grey King, Azor Ahai, and the Green Seers, all possess the fire of the gods in some form. The Grey King stole the fire of the gods twice over. Azor Ahai stole the fire of the gods in the forms of Lightbringer, the Black Meteor, and the burning tree represents a weirwood, whose powers also represent the fire of the gods and are possessed by the Green Seers. So how does all this fit together? That is the question that I left you with. And now we're going to answer that question. So for starters, I think there's a good case to be made for the Grey King being a Green Seer at one point or in some way. That's one way the stories can begin to line up. If the Grey King was a Green Seer, then both Green Seers and the Grey King can be said to have called down the meteor fire from heaven. As to the Grey King's Green Seer status, consider the three things that he supposedly had that were made from Naga's bones. Besides the long haul that he made from her ribs, we also have the throne made from her jaws, and that pale crown made from her teeth. All of these make a great deal more sense when thought of as being made of weirwood. And since Naga's quote-unquote rib bones turned out to be made of weirwood, let's consider the throne and the crown in that context. The Grey King's pale crown, instead of being made from sea dragon teeth, becomes a weirwood crown. This would have been perhaps the model for the later driftwood crowns worn by the driftwood kings of the Ironborn. And in fact, in the world of Ice and Fire, it also talks of the Grey King being remembered in some tales as having worn the first driftwood crown. So in some stories, he's wearing a crown of Naga's teeth, and in other stories, it's the driftwood crown. And I think if the reality was a weirwood crown, then it kind of all comes together, and you can see how it would give rise to both myths. And there's actually a great clue about this in the paragraph that we already cited when Aaron describes Naga's hill.
On the crown of the hill, 44 monstrous stone ribs rose from the earth like the trunks of great pale trees.
It's a weirwood crown, get it? The weirwood ribs rise from the crown of this sea dragon hill, giving the hill a weirwood crown. I thought that was pretty nice. The name of the island itself, Old Wick, could also be intended to suggest fire, as in a candle wick. So the idea of a burning weirwood crown may be implied here as well. Grey King's throne, instead of being fashioned from the jaws of a sea monster, becomes a weirwood throne. And this too would make more sense than a throne made from a sea dragon's skull, as metal as that would be. A weirwood throne also would make the Grey King sound an awful lot like a Green Seer, of course, because sitting in a weirwood throne in a weirwood hall with weirwood branches wrapped around his head, I mean, shit, he sounds a lot like Bloodraven at this point.
That's what I was thinking the first time I ever heard that, was that it sounded a lot like Bloodraven.
Exactly. That's exactly what you should be thinking. And
Okay.
we've got a quote of Bloodraven to make that very point.
Before them, a pale lord in ebon finery sat dreaming in a tangled nest of roots, a woven weirwood throne that embraced his withered limbs as a mother does a child. His body was so skeletal and his clothes so rotted that at first Bran took him for another corpse, a dead man propped up so long that the roots had grown over him, under him, and through him. What skin the corpse lord showed was white, save for a bloody blotch that crept up onto his neck and onto his cheek. His white hair was fine and thin as root hair, and long enough to brush against the earthen floor. Roots coiled around his legs like wooden serpents.
Yes, very evocative. And in fact, I've got a really good picture here that I would like to quickly share. Screen share, application window, diddly. This is, yeah, there we go. This one is by Mark Simonetti, who did a lot of the art in The World of Ice and Fire. And that's probably my favorite picture of Bloodraven. That's a pretty good one. And then there's also this one of the Grey King from Arthur Balzanet, which I'll see if I can make bigger. There we go. That's a pretty good Grey King one. So this one is imagining Naga's jaws sort of set into stone. And then you can see his crown is like white fangs. But even then, it still looks a little bit like, like wood, like a jagged wooden crown.
And the bottom is almost marble, or stone.
Yeah, they at least made it pale stone, which is good. And so Sanri's drawing him with a more wooden crown, but you can see it's not. I mean, it kind of looks like wooden teeth. So it's a pretty cool double myth that Martin is doing here. So let me pull my screen share off and go back to the essay. D-liddy. I think it's worth a pause. It's good to bring a little bit of some images and some artwork into the mix. So anyways, our corpse lord, Brynden Rivers, a.k.a. Bloodraven, a.k.a. definitely the Three-Eyed Crow, sits in a weirwood throne wrapped in weirwood. Famously, Sammy, can you mute yourself? Thank you. He sits in a weirwood throne. He's wrapped in weirwood. Famously, one goes through Bloodraven's blind eye. And coiled around his legs are, quote, white wooden serpents, which is a perfect companion to the idea of a weirwood boat, remembered as a sea dragon. White weirwood sea dragon, white weirwood serpents. It's a pretty good match. Bloodraven himself is a white weirwood dragon for that matter, combining both dragon and weirwood symbolism, just as the sea dragon does. And of course, the dragon on his sigil is a white dragon. We also need to remember one other detail about the Grey King, which is he is implied as something of a corpse lord too, just like Bloodraven. And this one is from the World of Ice and Fire.
From there he ruled the Iron Islands for 1,000 years, until his very skin had turned as gray as his hair and beard.
And I'll just pause to point out Ravenous Reader, aka Raven Salix, points out that the Grey King, framed by the jaws of the sea dragon, is a lot like the Green Seer stepping through the maw of the Black Gate, the weirwood gate under the wall. And that is a very good observation, isn't it? Because he's literally sitting in the jaws of the sea dragon, which is really wood. And to enter the Black Gate, you literally walk into the mouth of the weirwood face. So nice one. And also Niana the Wise, Gretchen Ellis pointed out a minute ago that old wick, in addition to referring to a candle wick, might also be implying the Wicker Man, which of course makes a ton of sense because the King of Winter is a wicker man who catches on fire and is connected to weirwoods, as we took a look at in the Green Zombie series. So,
and also
very nice.
Shout out to Raven Salix, who is in the chat today, right now. So,
yeah, no, she that's where I got that. She just popped that in the chat. I picked it up from there. So,
I'm so sorry. I was just giving her creds.
Yeah, well, we can give her lots of Nenny Moaning cred anytime. So Aaron Damfair. So we just heard that the Grey King ruled the Iron Islands for 1,000 years until his skin turned gray, and this makes him sound very corpse-like because, of course, corpses' skin turns gray. And Aaron Damfair is more specific, saying that the Grey King reigned for, quote, 1,000 years and 7. Which kind of sounds like 1,000 eyes and one. I'm not sure what the point of the 7 years is, but the point is that Grey King had a very long lifespan, unnaturally long, just like Bloodraven, and he turned gray, which I would call corpse-like. And in fact, we have seen a 1,000-year-old face before, and it does in fact resemble a corpse.
It was white weirwood, and there was a face on it. A glow came from the wood, like milk and moonlight, so faint it scarcely seemed to touch anything beyond the door itself, not even Sam standing right before it. The face was old and pale, wrinkled and shrunken. It looks dead. Its mouth was closed, and its cheeks were sunken, its brow withered, its chin sagging. If a man could live for 1,000 years and never die, but just grow older, his face might come to look like that.
That was from A Storm of Swords at the Black Gate below the Night Fort. If a man could live 1,000 years and never die, but just grow older, well, that's just what the Grey King was said to have done. So we found a match for the Grey King's description as a 1,000-year-old man, and it turns out to be a dead-looking weirwood face that talks. So you can see how this begins to come together when we read about Grey King living 1,000 years and growing gray and corpse-like, and when we realize that his throne and crown were probably weirwood. Well, he really begins to sound a lot like some sort of green seer, now doesn't he? Now here's where the fire of the gods stuff comes in. So our pal the Grey King possesses the fire of the gods in two forms, right? He possesses the living fire of the sea dragon, and he stole fire from the storm god via the burning tree. But both of those myths have a layer of meaning which points to weirwood, as we've seen. The sea dragon bones are really weirwood, so possessing the sea dragon's living fire could definitely imply possessing the power of the weirwoods, which you gain by sitting in a weirwood throne, as the Grey King apparently did. The burning tree, on the other hand, is a symbol for a weirwood, and possessing the fire of the gods through the burning tree, again, sounds like the Grey King was sitting under a burning tree and possessing its fire, like Bloodraven. Therefore, I think we have every reason to believe that the Grey King was a green seer in one form or another. Interestingly, there's a completely opposite line of Ironborn symbols to the weirwood crown and the throne of the Grey King. However, they can also be thought of being made of sea dragon material as well. So just as we've seen that the sea dragon seems to refer to both white weirwood and black meteors, because remember the sea dragon is also a meteor falling into the ocean, we find that same sort of dichotomy expressed in the crowns and thrones of the Ironborn. Cough button. As an opposite to the Grey King's white weirwood throne, supposedly made of sea dragon jaws, but probably made of white weirwood, we have the sea stone chair, a throne carved from an oily black stone. If oily black stones are meteorites or meteorite-related stones, as I suggest, then this too is sea dragon furniture, if you will. As an opposite to the Grey King's white weirwood crown, we also have the black iron crown worn by the Iron Kings, and more recently by Balin Greyjoy. It isn't said to be made of oily black stone, but it is simply the familiar black iron crown symbol, which signifies an inverted solar king. And of course, black iron was taken from the meteorites to make swords with, according to our theory. Then we have Theon, if you remember, when he was coming to Pike with that letter from Robb, he referred to it as a parchment crown, which was white. So he's got the white wooden crown, but then it was set on fire, and it curled and blackened in the flames. And so this also fits the pattern. We go from a white parchment crown, which is a clever way of alluding to a pale wooden crown, since parchment is made from trees or plants. And of course, it later turns black and catches on fire, just like the black crown on top of Castle Pike, if you recall, which is from the Nightfire. So throughout all of this symbolism, the sea dragon continues to show us black meteors and white weirwood trees. The big question is, how do those two things come together? What is the link, if any, between weirwoods and the black moon meteors? The first part of the answer I've basically already suggested. The green seers were said to have called down the hammer of the waters, and the hammer of the waters was just a way of describing a moon meteor impact. So the Grey King called down moon meteors in two different stories, right? So this would make a lot more sense if the Grey King is a green seer, one of the ones who was somehow responsible for bringing down the moon. As to how you steer a comet into a moon, well, more on that in a future episode. But as I've said before, I've never bought the idea that the children of the forest were the green seers who broke the arm of Dorne and called down the hammer. Rather, I've always thought it more likely that human green seers were the ones who abused their access to magical power and probably caused this great disaster. I'm thinking that eventually all the deeds ever committed by green seers of any kind probably came to be attributed to the children of the forest, because the memory of human green seers seems to have almost completely faded from Westeros. I believe that human green seer kings were a thing in the Dawn Age, to say the least. I've also jokingly called these potential green seers who broke the moon naughty green seers, because I believe they were in fact doing something quite naughty, for lack of a desire to use a more serious word. These would have been treacherous rebel green seers who were violating the natural order, if you will, stealing from the gods, breaking the cycle of nature. That's the idea. The children of the forest are seemingly content to pass quietly into the night. Don't tell Tony Teflon or Quinn, but I read them fairly in a straightforward fashion, that they are in fact content that their sun is setting and that they have elapsed their given time on the earth. But of course, anyone who tries to gain the cup of immortality and fight that kind of destiny would be defying the life and death cycle, which would be contrary to the philosophy of the children of the forest. So the Grey King seems like just such a figure, potentially, a green seer who called down the black moon meteors and to try to possess the fire of the gods, and then apparently became immortal in some way, or at least he certainly resisted death. When you live for 1,000 years and yet don't die, that's just the kind of fighting death that I'm talking about. So it's probably also pretty obvious to you that Azor Ahai fits all these descriptions as well. He's someone who brought down the moon goddess to possess her fire. So it could be that Azor Ahai and Grey King are completely separate dudes on separate continents, whose mythology both sprang up around becoming a powerful king at the time when the black meteors fell. But as I've said before, I think the Azor Ahai story basically has to end in Westeros, or else it's just simply hard to see how it's relevant to the main story. And we've spent way too much time in the books on Azor Ahai and Lightbringer for it to be irrelevant. Now, I've found many clues indicating that Azor Ahai did indeed come to Westeros by dragon and by boat, and therefore it is entirely possible, and I'd even say probable, that the Grey King mythology does, in part, refer to the deeds of Azor Ahai, perhaps transposed on top of a more local hero, or heroes, who established the Ironborn fishing and seagoing culture, making the first boats, being a great king who founded a dynasty there, and so on. The sea dragons as boats idea also suggests a storm of invading sea dragon boats, fiery people from over the sea, immigrating to or invading Westeros, which could be Azor Ahai's fleet of pirates from Ashai, as I like to call them. And of course, Crowfood's daughter has made a really good video about the sea dragon boat, and one of the angles she covered was that this likely one layer of this myth is referring to, in fact, people who came by boat to Westeros in the Dawn Age from the east. So if you want more about that, check out The Disputed Lands, of course. And then, as we've seen in our study of the Great Empire of the Dawn and Ashai with the history of Westeros, which I know all of you have watched, there is definitely credible reason to think that some sort of Ashai to Westeros contact did indeed occur around or before the time of the Long Night. And thus, there may well be a plausible mechanism to explain how the matching mythologies of Azor Ahai and the Grey King may indeed be referring to the same events and people, at least in some cases and in some sense. Now, if the Grey King and Azor Ahai are, in some sense, that same person, or at least if their stories refer to the same deeds and events, and if the Grey King was one of those naughty green seers, does it follow that Azor Ahai was a naughty green seer? Yes, absolutely. That's exactly the point. Azor Ahai was a green seer, a naughty one who transformed himself with fire magic through the stealing of the moon. It's the same logic here as with the Grey King. If the green seers had something to do with calling down the hammer, and if the hammer was a moon meteor, and if Azor Ahai broke the moon, as his legend says he did, then it's possible that the answer to these seemingly conflicting tales is simply that Azor Ahai was a green seer who broke the moon and thereby called down the hammer of the waters. I think that's the case, and there's really quite a bit of excellent symbolism to support this idea, which begins with that burning tree symbol. And here I will again share my screen to show you this amazing burning tree artwork by somebody from DeviantArt called Being Stoned, which I have to like. And it is a burning tree, just for your edification.
Thank you so much for always giving your artist credit.
Oh, I would
say thank you.
Of course, absolutely. would never consider doing it. When I find a piece of artwork that's really good and isn't attributed, like sometimes you find those on not Tumblr, but Instagram. They're really bad about putting art with no attribution. What I'll do is I'll post it and then I'll put in the caption, does anybody know who the artist is? So somebody can like let me know and then I can give them credit. But yes, always credit your artists, folks. Always credit your
I'm not going to derail your stream. I'd just like to mention that not all art is public domain. If it's something like it's from the World Book, or if it's something that's officially published, it may be closer to public domain, but always give your artist credit. Thank you. Continue.
And I always additionally link to their sites in the captions too. So it's not just a name, but you can easily check out their art, because I figure if you like their art, you might want to, check out their other art.
Yeah, and that's super, super appreciated as an artist and someone who is actively doing things like that and just trying to get, visuality and exposure. Like, help artists out, share their names. Like, that's how we make money, and it's always appreciated.
Yeah, and I've made a lot of good friends by contacting folks and looking for their consent. Most people are always really happy to do it, and you end up making cool friends too. So, I mean,
all you got to do is ask, and most of the time we'll say, yeah, just give me a link.
Yep. And also a lot of, people are selling their stuff for very reasonable prices. So you can throw somebody a couple bills and get something cool to hang on the wall,
Yeah.
Like at sandrixian.com.
Yeah, not a promo there, but more just a thank you and appreciate that you look out for your artists.
Right on. So the central aspect of the Lightbringer forging metaphor is, of course, transformation. Nissa and the moon that she represents were transformed when they were stabbed by Lightbringer or by the comet. And Azor Ahai and the sun that he represents were both transformed and turned dark through the dark deeds that went down during the long night. We've talked about the moon transformation quite extensively, of course. And here for a minute, I'd like to focus on Azor Ahai's transformation, which mirrors that of the sun. The smoke and ash from the moon meteor impacts are what clouded the sky and darkened the sun, transforming it into the night sun, if you will. And in parallel fashion, I think the black meteors were used by the Bloodstone Emperor to work dark magic that had a transformative effect on himself. And that's basically just what the World of Ice and Fire says. He worshipped the black stone that fell from the sky during the long night, and he practiced all the dark magic. So I'm really it's not even a theory. It's basically just what the World Book says. But everything I've researched about Azor Ahai and the Bloodstone Emperor simply backs that up. And you guys are all well familiar with that. So this transformation act was essentially the result of Azor Ahai taking possession of the fire of the gods in the form of that black stone, which, of course, we think is a moon meteor. The exact same idea is also found in the Grey King myth, I believe. If the tree set ablaze by the thunderbolt represents a weirwood, then the Grey King must have bonded with it in order to possess its fire. And that would so essentially he would be then transforming himself to obtain the fire of the gods, just like Azor Ahai. He may have even had to die and be resurrected at some point. And of course, that's another thing that Crowfoot's daughter has explored in more detail on her most recent video on the Disputed Lands. And it seems like the mermaid wife might be the person that resurrects the Grey King, very much in the way that the triple goddess resurrects the Horned Lord. But that's a little bit of a side branch. So the same thing is basically true of Azor Ahai. He seems to have been a resurrected person, as we well know. So similarly, we might also interpret the lighting of a tree on fire as the activation of the weirwood bond. And this is where it gets interesting, because before the tree was ablaze, it wouldn't look like a weirwood, right? It's the fiery leaves that give it the resemblance to the weirwood tree. So without the weirwood bond, a human cannot access the godlike power of the weirwood net. The powers of astral projection, limited time travel, unlimited peeping Tom ability, and long life, which the weirwood connection offers, is the fire of the old gods, the knowledge and the magic of the old gods. If the thunderbolt sets the tree on fire, it might mean that it was the meteor strike that triggered some sort of change to the weirwoods, perhaps activating them or corrupting them or mutating them or allowing humans somehow to access the weirwood net. These are all ideas that we are going to follow up on in the Q&A portion in just a few minutes. But now it's time to get to the really good part of this episode, the last section, which is something that I've been working to get to for a long time. And thus it is my pleasure to present to you Green Seers of Fire. This final section is brought to you by these redoubtable Zodiac patrons: Sir Dionysus of House Galadon, wielder of the milk-glass blade, the Just Made, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Virgo and Libra; Turin the Elf, tavern keep of the Wine Spring Inn, master of the Abyss, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Cancer; Sarah Stark of the Wolf's Blood, the shining hand of Phaesphoria, and the earthly avatar of Heavenly House Sagittarius; Queen Cameron, Lady of the Twilight, keeper of the Astral Cats, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Aries; and Melanie Lot 7, aka the Child of the Forest, known as Feathercrow, the Weircat Dryad, earthly avatar of Heavenly House Capricorn. Hey, Melanie Lot 7.
Hey, Melanie.
So let's check in with Senrixian on our Grey King artwork. How we doing? Let me catch my breath, too. Everyone is muted. It's very quiet.
So sorry. I'm doing good. I'm starting to lay out the top branches. We've got some sculpted Naga-like teeth. We've got Naga teeth crown / werewood bone. And now we're gonna do the bone tree rib cage upside down shellboat explosion magic time submarine.
Nice.
I like how Grey King sort of he's a little bit in, he's kind of like, man, I sure have been sitting on this thing a long time.
Oh, he's tired, and his eyebrows are just, somebody get him some tweezers, man.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or
That's
like
fair.
some
No,
scissors.
leave them like they are. That's good.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they get bushy after about 5 centuries or so.
I feel like yeah, easily. And he's got some seaweed, because his robes are made from woven seaweed. I think I read that somewhere. So he's got some seaweed and some cool elf shoes. I mean,
Oh, I like the elf shoes.
I can't say it. The Great Empire of the Dawn. I feel like they have some kind of.
Yeah, they'd wear elf shoes. Totally.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
valid.
Thank
That's
you.
valid.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the World Book also gave the Grey King elf shoes as well.
Thank you.
So there you go. Yeah.
Maybe it's a woods people thing. Like, I mean, like.
They're like wooden Dutch. They're like wooden shoes. That's what they are.
There you go.
Dogs.
He's a Dane after all, right? Oh, all right.
Nice.
So Stephen Stark says that the Grey King looks a little bit like him, and I think he's right.
Yes, it's because I literally just painted Steven like last night, so that probably has something to do with it. Is that very confusing, what I just said? You got really
No.
quiet.
No, I was.
Sorry.
It's 4:15. I think I was.
Oh.
It's getting in a little early, but
Yes.
But Stephen Stark does have that wise sort of look to him. So
Yes, he's very wise, and he has a great beard and great hair, so it fits.
I might have to rework Stephen Stark's nickname. I actually just read it a moment ago. Let's see, what was it? It's pretty good as it is. It's
Let me hear it one more time.
the Smiling Wolf, Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, Jedi of Just Ice, he who awaits the Corn King. Which is cool because the Broken Tower was struck by lightning, just like the Grey King's tree. So I'm sure I can work something in there.
He needs something about his hospitality, like how he's the maester of the house, which is totally a Les Mis pun that I came up with. Feel
Yeah.
free to use that.
Well, I gave him that when we were doing the Royal Court on Twitter.
Oh, I love the royal
Yeah.
court.
Yeah.
Like grantor of guest right.
Something like
Yes.
that. Oh, that's good. I like that. All right, so Amanda, since we're going at a little bit more leisurely pace today, I don't have 3 hours of material to try to rush through. Give me some thoughts on the section we just read and the Weirwood boat in general, because you've done a lot of fucking work on this in particular.
Yeah, so I unpacked the all of the different theories. So currently there's 3 theories when it comes to Naga. There obviously it says in the books that Naga was a sea dragon. So that's one, school of thought is that Naga was a sea dragon. There's not a whole lot to support that. I kind of go into that. We don't see any real present day sea dragons. It's only kind of hinted at maybe one time where old Dan mentions sea monsters, not specifically sea dragons. There's also the Weirwood Grove theory, and there's my dogs. But there's also the Weirwood Grove theory. So we discussed that. Some people think it's possible that Naga is a Weirwood Grove. So that's also discussed. And finally, there's the Weirwood boat theory, which I believe to be the most plausible when you actually look at the tale of the Grey King and you look at how Naga is described and you look at all of the symbolism within this series. All the symbolism points toward Naga being a boat, where you get like people like Arya Hota talking about a massive Drummond washing ashore and turning to stone, and then you have the bones of Naga described as being a Drummond, and you have all these different things. It's really pointing towards that.
So I've actually got my favorite example of this, and I read this to Sanrixian last night to give her the idea of what the Grey King's Hall should look like. So I think this is really the giveaway quote. And I know you used this in your video. It's from A Storm of Swords, a John chapter when they're fighting the wildlings. And it says, let's see. On the edge of the wall, an ornate brass mirrorish eye stood on 3 spindly legs. Maester Aemon had once used it to peer at the stars before his own eyes had failed him. John swung the tube down to have a look at the foe. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking Mance Rayder's huge white tent, sewn together from the pelts of snow bears. The mirrorish lenses brought the wildlings close enough for him to make out faces. Of Mance himself, he saw no sign this morning, but his woman Dala was outside tending the fire, while his sister Val milked a she-goat beside the tent. Dala looked so big it was a wonder she could move. The child must be coming very soon, John thought. He swiveled the eye east and searched among the tents and trees till he found the turtle. That will be coming very soon as well, he thought. The wildlings had skinned one of the dead mammoths during the night, and they were lashing the raw, bloody hide over the turtle's roof, one more layer on top of the sheepskins and pelts. The turtle had a rounded top and 8 huge wheels, and under the hides was a stout wooden frame. When the wildlings had begun knocking it together, Satin thought they were building a ship. Not far wrong. The turtle was a hull, turned upside down, and opened fore and aft, a long haul on wheels. So it tells you right there that a flipped over wooden boat hull becomes a long haul. And it's even made out of, since it's called a turtle, it's even given an association with a sea creature. It's not a sea dragon, of course, but when you look at the turtles of the Rhoyne, they are horned turtles that bellow with loud horn sounds and all the rest. So that's kind of my favorite.
And their deity is called the Old Man of the River as well, and he's kind of an Azor Ahai type of a character, so you get all those different associations right there as well.
Old Man River, he's the turtle of the river.
Well, maybe when we do open up the silly drawing portion of the segment, we can get an old turtle man of some kind. That would be a good one.
I'm such an addition to your streams, aren't I?
I think
More
so.
like a distraction.
and old turtle man, you were going to draw that anyway, right? George R. R. Martin as a turtle?
Yes, it's really essentially the same thing.
Yes.
Well, my whole strategy is to offer different things to different people. If you like the fun live stream antics, then you can check out the YouTube versions of everything. And if you like the clean edited stuff, then the podcast feed trims out all the fat and just gives you the material. And if you like to read it, then you can read it on the blog. So, I try to give it to everybody in the method that they prefer.
Remove 90% of my goofiness, please.
Oh, well, the podcasts are just straight up. I usually even just re-record those. So
Dang,
it's just the essay. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And that also gives people an incentive to come check out YouTube and join in the fun if they want to, get drawn into the Shame Cube or maybe even the Weirwood Submarine if you can graduate to a high enough level.
Not everybody gets put in the shame cube like instantly. There's many opportunities for you to be drawn anywhere, really.
Yeah,
There's
and even once you're in the
background.
shame cube, you can get out of the shame cube. There's opportunities for
Yeah.
advancement. We have ladders.
We have ladders, and we have a bridge now to the shame dungeon that Matt and Steven are in.
Oh, are they currently in the shame dungeon?
Yes, in the shame dungeon, which is a new level of shame hell.
Oh, for all their fucking playing card nerdiness?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah. And because Joe Magician had dinner plans and couldn't come to our stream.
He's there now. He's on his date.
Yeah, he's like under the table with the phone. All right, well, let's get this going so I can finish this and then get Gretchen on here before it's too late. So,
Gretchen.
all right, Green Seers of Fire, guys. Green Seers of Fire. It's not a terribly long section, actually. So we've got this one section left. It's pretty important. I almost broke it off when I wrote this original one into its own little essay, which I probably should have done. But it's kind of the cherry on top of everything that we've done so far in The Grey King and the Sea Dragon. So, having just presented you with the theory that the Grey King and Azor Ahai are stories both referring to a green seer or group of green seers who pulled down the moon and transformed themselves through the fire magic of the moon meteors, I feel the need to provide some supporting evidence beyond what we have laid out already. Obviously, we're near the end of this episode, so we're only going to scratch the surface here, which is why I'm calling this episode the start of a new compendium based around Weirwood and Green Seers. Subsequent episodes will build on these ideas. And this is back when I planned on picking up the Green Seers of Fire thread in part 2, which will now be part 5. So it's still true, just in a different way than when I wrote it originally. And actually, I'm going to need to change my hat. 1 second.
Hat time. Dun, dun, dun.
Because now that we know the Grey King is really Azor Ahai.
Dun,
Valerian.
dun.
There you go.
Let me just, yeah, how's that? That's good. This is pretty, I look pretty hippied out today. I'm a pretty hippie dragon. That's good. Hippie dragons are good. We saw the angry dragon on Twitter recently. It wasn't good. It was a bad look. Sorry, everyone. In any case, moving right along. So we've got, what we're going to do now is we're going to tie a bow on this episode by examining the all-important burning tree symbol and how it relates to the idea of a fiery green seer. So Azor Ahai, as we know, is a fiery sorcerer. He's a magician and a warrior of fire, and he seems to have transformed himself through the use of fire magic and blood magic, and possibly a bit of meteor magic, if there is such a thing. After all, the Bloodstone Emperor was said to worship the black stone that fell from the sky. Thing is, there is a persistent connection between the burning trees, especially burning weirwoods, and the idea of fiery sorcerers. Many times we find burning wood present at Lightbringer forging scenes, and from those symbolic bonfires, we see descriptions of fiery sorcerers waking and emerging and even dancing. They're fun-loving guys, those fiery sorcerers. Now, we've actually been seeing them for 5 books now, and I think you'll be surprised to see all these quotes that have them hidden right in plain sight. They're everywhere. This will be kind of like a Where's Waldo-style hunt for fiery sorcerers standing in bonfires that runs through many of the best Lightbringer forging reenactment scenes in the series. We're going to take a look at 6 such scenes where the fiery sorcerers appear. Arya and the Night's Watch recruits in the abandoned holdfast near Harrenhal. The scene at the Red Temple where Bonero pantomimes the destruction of the moon. The burning of the 7 on Dragonstone. The alchemical wedding where Dany wakes the dragons. The dragon-on-dragon battle between Moondancer and Sunfire from the Targaryen Civil War known as the Dance of the Dragons, and Jon and Qhorin Halfhand in the Frostfangs right before Jon is forced to kill Qhorin. The premise is this. The burning tree symbol represents the weirwoods, and more specifically, it represents the weirwoods as a source of divine power that man can tap into. The burning tree is set ablaze by the thunderbolt strike of the storm god, which represents a meteor strike. And thus we can say that the burning tree seems to exist at the location, symbolically, of a moon meteor impact. Or more generally, we might be able to say that the burning tree and the moon meteors landing on Planetos are somehow linked. What we'll see in the following scenes are depictions of fiery sorcerers waking and emerging from burning wood at the same time and place that the forging of Lightbringer or the landing of one of the Lightbringer meteors is symbolized. What exactly this means, we'll try to discover as we go. But right at the start, I'm asserting that these fiery sorcerers are representative of a green seer transforming himself through fire, and that this seems to have been made possible by the moon meteors and or the events of the long night. This, I believe, is the beginning of the truth that is behind the myths of Grey King and Azor Ahai. The first scene we'll take a look at is the scene from A Clash of Kings, where Arya, Yoren, and the Night's Watch recruits are trapped in these small abandoned holdfast near Harrenhal. The star of the scene is an actual burning tree, but the setup to that is important. Yoren's company are besieged by Sir Amory Lorch, whose sigil contains a black manticore and 3 golden coins. And of course, golden coins are dragons in Westeros. As we're about to see, Sir Amory's attack is very much a reenactment of the attack of the dragon meteors on Planetos.
For a moment, she thought the town was full of lantern bugs. Then she realized they were men with torches, galloping between the houses. She saw a roof go up, flames licking at the belly of the night, with hot orange tongues as the thatch caught. Another followed, and then another, and soon there were fires blazing everywhere. Gendry climbed up beside her, wearing his helm. How many? Arya tried to count, but they were riding too fast, torches spinning through the air as they flung them. 100, she said. 200, I don't know. Over the roar of the flames, she could hear shouts. They'll come for us soon. There, Gendry said, pointing. A column of riders moved between the burning buildings toward the holdfast. Firelight glittered off metal helms and spattered their mail and plate with orange and yellow highlights. One carried a banner on a tall lance. She thought it was red, but it was hard to tell in the night, with the fires roaring all around. Everything seemed red or black or orange. The fire leapt from one house to another.
So there are 2 ideas in those quotes that work as a setup to the payoff line in the scene. There are flames personified as a living thing, and living soldiers personified as flames, as beings of fire. These are basically 2 sides of the same coin, which work to show us beings made of fire. The fire is described like a person, and the people are like fire. So starting with the anthropomorphized fire, we see flames licking at the belly of the night with orange tongues and leaping from one house to another like some kind of wild animal. And twice the fire is also roaring like an animal or a dragon, as if the fire has become some kind of beast. More importantly, we have the fiery soldiers. Sir Amory's men with torches are first equated with lantern bugs, which are flying things associated with fire. And then the fire reflects off their helms and armor, making them look as if their armor were on fire, or made of fire even. These fiery lantern bug knights then send their torches spinning through the air like spinning meteors. There's a line a bit further on that says, a torch sailed spinning above their heads, trailing fingers of fire as it thumped down in the dirt of the yard. After which Yoren immediately shouts, blades, which I take as a clue to associate these spinning torches with blades, as in the flaming swords of the moon meteor shower. Notice that the torch trails fingers of fire, almost as if the lantern bug men had thrown their fiery hands at Arya and the company. And of course, this would seem like a representation of the fiery hand of R'hllor symbol, which we know and love. Like the fiery tongues, fingers of fire also works to create the image of a being made of fire. Then we also get spears being hurled out of the fire-bright shadows, which reminds us of the moon meteors as sun spears symbolism, and of the idea of fiery shadows, like Melisandre's shadow babies being described as shadows with a burning heart, or Drogon the winged shadow who spits black fire, both of which are, of course, black meteor symbols. What else? And the soldiers, after the soldiers get inside the holdfast, there's a line where they're described as steel shadows with flames shining off their mail and blades. So it's like really redundant here. These are steel shadows that have fiery swords and fiery armor. And again, I will remind you that the Ghost of Heart sees the shadow baby assassin in a vision as a shadow with a burning heart. So that imagery is being very strongly evoked here, I would say. Finally, there are 2 references to storms. That's right. Right before the spinning torches that make Yoren say blades come flying over the wall, Sir Amory says, storm the gates. So that's a storm of meteor torches and fiery knights with fiery blades, or however you want to say that. Right before they storm the castle, there's a long discussion about whether or not Yorn's group of Night's Watch pledges might not be serving the rebel Lord Beric, the lightning lord with the flaming sword. And this serves to remind us of the connection between lightning and flaming swords. There's a terrific line where the sarcastic Yoren says, "Are you blind, man? You see a bloody lightning bolt?" That's a tasty one because it links the thunderbolt idea with blood, which is convenient if you have a theory about the storm god's thunderbolt really being a bleeding star or a bloodstone moon meteor. And then we get the payoff line.
Arya saw a tree consumed, the flames creeping across its branches until it stood against the night in robes of living orange.
So right there in the center of it all, we have the burning tree, set ablaze by one of these twirling meteor torches, and a terrific echo of the storm god's thunderbolt meteor setting the Grey King's tree ablaze. The burning tree here is rendered in grandiose fashion as it stands against the night in robes of living orange, almost like some sort of fire priest. Actually, just like a fire priest. We're going to see that robes of flame are the hallmark of these fiery sorcerers that we're tracking down, beginning here with the burning tree. This entire scene with Arya and the burning tree specifically evokes the symbols of the Temple of R'hllor and its priests. So let's take a look at our actual, real fire priests next. So this is the scene in Dance with Dragons where Bonero pantomimes the moon destruction with his fist, a scene that we've dissected several times. I don't need to quote the entire thing because, suffice it to say, it is a scene with heavy Lightbringer forging and moon destruction symbolism going on, and we already know that. There are many symbols in common with the Arya scene that we just read, including fiery spears, the fiery hand, fiery knights, and of course, those fiery robes.
The acolytes were clad in robes of pale yellow and bright orange, priests and priestesses in red. Bonero's high voice carried well. Tall and thin, he had a drawn face and skin as white as milk. Flames had been tattooed across his cheeks and chin and shaven head to make a bright red mask that crackled about his eyes and coiled down around his lipless mouth. "Is that a slave tattoo?" asked Tyrion. The knight nodded. The Red Temple buys them as children and makes them priests or temple prostitutes or warriors. Look there. He pointed at the steps, where a line of men in ornate armor and orange cloaks stood before the temple's doors, clasping spears with points like writhing flames. The fiery hand, the Lord of Light's sacred soldiers, defenders of the temple. Fire Knights. How many fingers does this hand have, pray? 1,000. You're muted.
What's great about that is I was actually talking about the pantomime. So I was pantomiming on mute. So, but you can probably guess that I was talking about Bonero pantomiming the moon destruction by pointing at the moon, making a fist, and then exploding his fist in little fingers of fire. So yes, and I'm getting questions about my shirt. It is in fact a tree with white roots. It's got blue and purple on it, so it's not totally up to spec, but there it is. I look like somebody's Aunt Kathy a little bit, which is probably very disturbing for that person. So sorry about that, and I probably shouldn't. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that alone. Sorry, I'll just apologize. In any case, this is the moon destruction pantomime happens right after the quote that we just read. So this time, instead of the moon blowing up, what we're focusing on is the fiery people and their oh-so-fashionable attire. The burning tree in the last scene that we read wore robes of living orange, and here we see robes of pale yellow and bright orange and red. So it kind of seems like the fire priests of R'hllor are trying to look as though they were robed in fire. And then Bonero and the other high priests of R'hllor are actually taking it further, such as Makoro. And they've got actually masks of writhing flame tattooed on their faces. So they're essentially tattooed to look as if they are literally made out of living fire. I've speculated that this might be done in remembrance of some lost art of fire transformation, one which Melisandre may have rediscovered, and perhaps Moqorro too, since he did survive 10 days floating in the ocean without drowning or freezing, which is pretty impressive. And so the idea of people made of fire is also represented in the Fire Knights, who are counted as the fingers of R'hllor's fiery hand, which of course makes them meteor symbols. The Fire Knights actually make a nice parallel to the knights with flames reflecting on their armor and swords in the Arya scene. And of course, they hurled torches trailing fingers of fire. So like I said, the symbolism is just, I mean, it's a very tight match. So Melisandre was our first example of a fire priestess. And she, of course, has robes which are often described in similar terms. Davos recalls her in A Storm of Swords with the line, "Her red gowns moving like flames as she walked, a swirl of silk and satin." That compares very well with our tree wearing fiery robes of living orange. And Melisandre, of course, burned the wooden statues of the 7 who used to be sea dragon boats on Dragonstone. We're going to revisit that scene to observe the fiery sorcerers that awoke there in a moment. But first, there are some more clues to clean up from this Benerro scene. And check this out. You're going to like this.
For a while, Tyrion could still hear Benerro's voice growing fainter at their back, and the roars his words provoked, sudden as thunder.
Thunder, you don't say. That was the guy that was just hollering about the moon breaking into fiery fingers, right? Then in the next line, after the thunder reference, we get a hammer reference.
They came upon a stable. The knight dismounted, then hammered on the door until a haggard slave with a horse head on his cheek came running.
And I just want to say again, that is literally the next sentence after the last one ends with sudden as thunder. So even though they're transitioning from one scene to another, we get thunder and then hammering on the door. And then we just follow the symbolism right into the next scene. So the hammering brings a horse head, which reminds us of the Dothraki custom of perceiving stars as horses. And of course, what the horsehead person brings in is more moon meteor symbols.
The manacles were black iron, thick and heavy, each weighing a good 2 pounds, if the dwarf was any judge. The chains added even more weight. I must be more fearsome than I knew, Tyrion confessed, as the last links were hammered close. Each blow sent a shock up his arm, almost to his shoulder. Or were you afraid that I would dash away on these stunted little legs of mine?
Another hammering, and this time it sends a shock. So think lightning and electricity up Tyrion's arm. Think about an arm shocked by a hammer, and you'll have it. It's that bloody lightning bolt Yoren was talking about, hammering the arm of Dorne. You'll recall Tyrion's arm wounding scene from the Battle of the Green Fork, which we examined previously, although it was a long time ago now. In that scene, if you recall, he was hit by the Morning Star, like a Morning Star weapon, of a, quote, White Star Wolf, which is a Karstark. So that scene was also symbolizing the hammer of the waters breaking the arm of Dorne. At least that was our conclusion. And of course, we've seen many, many scenes where someone gets hit in the arm by something that symbolizes a meteor, like a morning star. And that, well, you guys know what that's about. So this chain of black iron that sends hammer shocks up Tyrion's arm is also a clue about the arm of Dorne, which, thanks to the hammering of the black iron thunderbolt meteorites, is now a chain of islands. Now, I don't have time to break down this entire chapter, but right after this, Mormont and Tyrion cross the Long Bridge of Atlantis, which is a bridge made of fused black stone with the aid of dragon fire and sorcery. The black iron chain of the bloody manacles, as Tyrion calls them, is basically a perfect miniature symbolic companion to the Black Dragon Stone Bridge. And Jorah and Tyrion even crossed this bridge from east to west, just as the first men would have crossed the arm of Dorne from east to west in the Dawn Age, before it became a chain of islands burnt by the dragon fire of the Hammer of the Waters meteor. Yes, that's right. So our next scene with fiery sorcerers and burning trees is the burning of the 7 on Dragonstone, which I just alluded to. We don't need to quote very much of it because we've done that before. So I'll just go with the relevant lines. Now remember that these burning gods of the 7 represent both sea dragons by way of their being Targaryen ships, or at least they're made from the masts of the Targaryen ships. And they're also burning trees because they are wooden masts, and masts are symbols of tree trunks, and they're also made from tree trunks. And what we think of as the bones of the sea dragon are described as the massive ships and actually pale trees, both. So you get that. In any case, the burning gods apparently brought their outfits. The burning gods apparently bought their outfits at the Red Temple outlet store in Ashai. Check it out.
The morning air was dark with the smoke of burning gods. They were all afire now. Maid and mother, warrior and smith, the crone with her pearl eyes, and the father with his gilded beard. Even the stranger, carved to look more animal than human. The old dry wood and countless layers of paint and varnish blazed with a fierce, hungry light. The burning gods cast a pretty light, wreathed in their robes of shifting flame, red and orange and yellow.
And I see Niana the Wise and Raven Salix once again riffing in the chat. They're mentioning Tyrion's chain. He both had a golden chain of hands around his neck, and then he made the black iron chain across the Blackwater River, which then caught on fire. And there was also the bridge of ships going on there. So that's again conflating burning ships and bridges and chains all together. So there's a whole lot going on at the Blackwater that capitalizes on all the symbolism that you guys, that you smart people are picking up on. So somebody's given me some feedback echo. Amanda, I don't know if that's you. I think it is you because Sandry's muted right now. So it's that same problem you were having before where it's like kind of faint, but it's coming through.
I'm leaning too close to my mic, I think.
Okay, it's your headphones, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So nice job, Raven Salix and Deanna. We'll riff on that in just a second. I'm almost done with this. So these burning gods are casting a pretty light, and they're wreathed in the robes of shifting flame, red and orange and yellow. It's the same language we've seen many times. It's those same fiery robes of red and orange and yellow. They're blazing and shining, but the smoke darkens the morning sky. Those are the burning sea dragon gods, and they're dressed like our fiery sorcerers. They were set on fire by Lightbringer, in a manner of speaking, or at least we can say that they burned while pierced with Lightbringer, meaning Stannis' sword. Lightbringer is the fire of the gods come down to man, and it comes down when the gods are set ablaze. This may support the idea that the thunderbolt burning a tree with godly fire idea of the Grey King Thunderbolt myth actually does translate to the Weirwood net being made accessible or altered in some way by the impacts of the moon meteors. This is the idea that I'm fascinated with. So there's an additional tie to the Weirwoods here, as the wood of the statues of the gods of the seven is called old, like the old gods. So it's old wood that are gods. Melisandre proceeds to burn the seven on Storm's End shortly after this, and that time she also burned a giant weirwood from the Storm's End godswood, what was in all likelihood an 8,000-year-old tree at the least from the days of Durran Godsgrief, the first Storm King. Naughty, naughty Melisandre. That was sacrilegious. In any case, this scene here at Dragonstone is tremendous and continues to yield up valuable clues. The fiery sorcerers emerge from the fire of the burning wooden sea dragon gods, a fire which also produces Lightbringer. Now let's take the search for fiery sorcerers to the alchemical wedding. If fiery sorcerers are an important part of the Lightbringer forging chain of events, then they will surely put in an appearance at the alchemical wedding, and indeed they do.
The flames writhed before her, like the women who danced at her wedding, whirling and singing and spinning their yellow and orange and crimson veils, fearsome to behold, yet lovely, so lovely, alive with heat. Dany opened her arms to them, her skin flushed and glowing. This is a wedding too, she thought. The flames were so beautiful, the loveliest things she had ever seen, each one a sorcerer, robed in yellow and orange and scarlet, swirling long, smoky cloaks.
All right. Let me just say real quick, I see a couple of very topical questions in the chat about the stuff we're talking about. So guys, just hold those questions a little bit longer, copy and paste them, and then launch them at me when I say go, because I see some good ones, but I don't want to break the flow right now to do that. So, all right. So now we've just seen sorcerers robed in yellow, orange, and scarlet with long smoky cloaks. And we saw dancers, fiery dancers, spinning with the orange, yellow, and crimson veils. So we've got a double whammy here. We've got fiery sorcerers and fiery dancers, and they're awakening from the bonfire of Lightbringer's cradle, just as they did at the burning of the 7 on Dragonstone. The language here is just so explicit. They're fiery sorcerers, and they come to life along with the dragons at Lightbringer's forging. You can see that George is really sticking to the same language: fiery robes and cloaks, red, orange, and yellow, and of course, smoke. We also see the inclusion of fiery dancers waking from the flames. And actually, I think these are the same people, because there's a whole line of symbolism about dancing and the horned moon that we'll get into eventually. And consider that the dragon known as Moon Dancer, or I should say, consider the dragon known as Moon Dancer, whom we hear about in The Princess and the Queen. Moon Dancer is a green dragon with pearl horns and claws. She's actually set on fire by a dragon named Sunfire in a reenactment of what's that? You want to hear the quote? Okay, well, that's terrific, because there is more fire masquerading as clothing going on here, and because this is just a sweet paragraph of hot dragon on dragon action.
They met amidst the darkness that comes before the dawn, shadows in the sky lighting the night with their fires. Moon Dancer eluded Sunfire's flames, eluded his jaws, darted beneath his grasping claws, then came around and raked the larger dragon from above, opening a long smoking wound down his back and tearing at his injured wing. Warriors below said that Sunfire lurched drunkenly in the air, fighting to stay aloft, whilst Moon Dancer turned and came back at him, spitting fire. Sunfire answered with a furnace blast of golden flame so bright it lit the art below like a second sun, a blast that took Moon Dancer full in the eyes. Like as not, the young dragon was blinded in that instant, yet still flew on, slamming into Sunfire in a tangle of wings and claws. As they fell, Moon Dancer struck at Sunfire's neck repeatedly, tearing out mouthfuls of flesh, whilst the elder dragon sank his claws into her underbelly. Robed in fire and smoke, blind and bleeding, Moon Dancer's wings beat desperately as she tried to break away. But all her efforts did was slow her fall.
That one, yeah, that one is epic. I mean, it's just really fantastic mythical astronomy here. The sun and moon colliding, destroying each other, which is exactly the picture of the eclipse, followed by the explosion, which the Carthian myth describes as the moon wandering too close to the sun and cracking from the heat. The thing that falls out of the sky represents the Lightbringer meteor, of course, and it's made of the sun and the moon combined, just as I've been saying, and it's a bloody and flaming dragon ball that is like a second sun, which reinforces the idea of Lightbringer as a second sun and all the symbolism that goes along with that. Moon Dancer is blinded, representing the torn out moon eye symbolic motif we've talked quite a bit about, and also Weirwood Stigmata. But more importantly, Moon Dancer is gloriously robed in fire. The line is robed in fire and smoke, just like the fiery dancers that woke from Dany's Lightbringer forging ceremony, and just like all the fiery sorcerers that we've seen so far, waking from Lightbringer wood burning incidents. The fact that these signature fiery robes are worn by a moon dancing green dragon is just rich with symbolic import, and all of it corroborates our theory about these fire sorcerers. They were green seers and dragon people, green dragons, if you will, awoken in the fires which forged Lightbringer. I'd also add that some part of their magic may involve dancing and singing, just as the children of the forest's true name is those who sing the song of earth. When Dany's dragons hatch, it says that the night came alive with the music of dragons. Those are actually the very last words of a Game of Thrones, so you know they're important. As an aside, let me say that I love that George took the time to write such epic metaphor and symbolism in even his quote-unquote supplementary A Song of Ice and Fire materials, such as The Princess and the Queen and The World of Ice and Fire. And so, you know, we'll be diving into Fire and Blood when that comes out, because anytime dragons fight, there is hecka mythical astronomy going on. That is for show. So now that we've introduced fiery moon dancers to the family of fire people, there's actually a pair of loose details to clean up from the alchemical wedding scene, which relate to Ironborn mythology.
And there came a second crack, loud and sharp as thunder, and the smoke stirred and whirled around her, and the pyre shifted, the logs exploding as the fire touched I cannot talk today. As the fire touched their secret hearts.
It's okay, we forgive you. This entire solar pyre is made of carefully arranged pieces of wood, and the reference to secret hearts certainly seems like a reference to the heart trees, trees which appear to be on fire and harbor basically every secret that there is. Secret fiery hearts, know what I mean? The hearts are set on fire when the dragon's lunar egg cracks open with a thunderous sound, just as the thunderbolt moon meteor set the tree ablaze. This is also the second egg, which means Rhaegal, the green dragon, for what it's worth, and it's worth quite a lot, I would say, reminding us of Moondancer, the green dragon, and of green seers who were dragon people. When I see the thunderous green dragon touching the secret wooden hearts with fire, I'm again seeing a possible suggestion that the Weirwood net was activated or altered, set on fire, if you will, by the meteor strike. Now, to conclude the alchemical wedding scene, I'll note that Drogo, too, wears the fiery garments.
And now the flames reached her Drogo. And now they were all around him. His clothing took fire, and for an instant, the cowl was clapped in wisps of floating orange silk and tendrils of smoke, of curling smoke, gray and greasy.
Now, the reason I point this out is because Drogo is playing the role of the dying Solar King here, and he wears the robes of the fiery sorcerer. He represents the death of the sun and the death of Azor Ahai, while his perceived resurrection as the Red Comet parallels the waking of the dragons and the rebirth of Azor Ahai as a dark Solar King. That's why the inclusion of greasy smoke and oil to light the wood a bit earlier. Greasy, oily black stone. The point is, the fiery sorcerer woken from the Lightbringer pyre is none other than
go.
The reborn Azor Ahai. That's
Azor Ahai!
Thanks for helping me through that one, Sandry. So this is the burning tree that we've been tracking down. It's Azor Ahai, the green seer who transformed himself through fire magic by cracking open the moon and waking the stone dragons, setting the tree on fire. Drogo is consumed in the fire here, but in a moment, he appears to rise from the flames, mounted on a smoky stallion, just as the tree was consumed in the fire of the storm god's thunderbolt and gave birth to a gray king who was now armed with the fire of the gods. So Drogo is literally a gray king here, wearing fiery robes. It's pretty good stuff. And those of you who are tuned into Yggdrasil mythology know that the gray horse is also an Yggdrasil symbol. And I think it was Westeros who first pointed that out to me, Unchained. So I've got Nienna the Wise entering the stream here. Hello, Nienna. I'll give you the appropriate greeting in just a second. We've got like 3 more paragraphs here. Hi, everybody.
Gretchen!
Gretchen! The Gretchark.
Yes, yes.
So basically, anytime we find burning weirwoods, we have Azor Ahai making an appearance. Melisandre, the fiery sorceress, has all the wildlings burn a piece of weirwood as they cross through the wall and enter the 7 kingdoms, for example. And look who's standing there, none other than Azor Ahai impressionists, Stannis Baratheon, and Jon Snow. That was the same fire in which they burned the horn that bears an uncanny resemblance to Dragonbinder, but was called the Horn of Jormung. Hell, even almost weirwood burnings are linked to Azor Ahai figures. For example, think of when Jon Snow is offered Winterfell and the Stark name by Stannis. It comes with the condition of having to burn the heart tree in the Winterfell Godswood, which Jon simply refuses to do. Good job, Jon. But while he's considering this choice, he has the dream of swimming in the Black Pond beneath the weirwood tree with fiery moon maiden Ygritte, which shows us the drowning of a fiery moon maiden in a cold black pool. It's yet another iteration of the sea dragon myth. And then remember also that this is the same pond that Ned sticks his bloody dragon sword into as we examined in Waves of Night and Moonblood. So there's lots of sea dragon sword drowning going on here. And then by virtue of, like I said, a burning tree is also brought into the mix by the idea of Jon Snow having to burn the tree to assume Winterfell. And then that leads directly to this dream. So there you have it. Now, sticking with Jon Snow, we have our last sighting of fiery sorcerers woken by Azor Ahai in Burning Wood. And this is from A Clash of Kings.
I'll do as you say, Jon said reluctantly. But you will tell them, won't you? The old bear, at least? You'll tell him that I never broke my oath. Corn Halfhand gazed at him across the fire, his eyes lost in pools of shadow. When I see him next, I swear it. He gestured at the fire. More wood. I want it bright and hot. Jon went to cut more branches, snapping each one in two before tossing it in the flames. The tree had been dead a long time, but it seemed to live again in the fire, as fiery dancers woke with each stick of wood to whirl and spin in their glowing gowns of yellow, red, and orange. Enough, Corn said abruptly. Now we ride. Ride? It was dark beyond the fire, and the night was cold.
This is a great one. I told you you'd be surprised by how flagrant these quote pulls are, right? The tree had been dead a long time, but seemed to live again, as it gave birth to fiery dancers wearing the familiar uniform of red, orange, and yellow clothing. I mean, that one was pretty on the nose. And this comes as Jon is about to commit a blood betrayal of sorts, as he's forced by circumstance to turn his sword on his brother. That fight occurs right next to a dead tree, the one the eagle perches on when they emerge from the cave, for what it's worth. There's an additional tie between the dead tree that was resurrected in the fire and the Night's Watch, because at the end of this chapter, Corwin's body is burned on a wooden pyre made of broken branches, mirroring the earlier fire of broken branches from which the fiery dancers emerged. This is important because the Night's King and the last hero were members of the Night's Watch, and I suspect that one of those people were either Azor Ahai, or I suspect that... Oh man, I screwed that sentence up when I wrote it. I suspect that Night's King and Last Hero were either Azor Ahai or his offspring, as I've said it several times. So linking Corwin's burning corpse to the fire in which the dead tree lived again is suggestive of Night's Watch brothers as fiery sorcerers. And as you may recall, we've seen lots of other evidence suggesting that the original Night's Watch may have been fire undead people, perhaps even green seers and skin changers who were resurrected in a similar manner to Azor Ahai or the Last Hero or the Grey King, or however many people are behind the truth of these myths. And of course, that is the Green Zombies theory. So in conclusion, I give you Azor Ahai, the Green Seer, in the form of Beric Dondarrion. He wields a flaming sword, check. Reference to lightning, he's the Lightning Lord, so check. Resurrected through fire magic and bleeds black blood, check and check. Sits on a weirwood throne, actually yes, check. Not a live Green Seer throne such as Bloodraven sits in, but we have seen before that when we quoted the scene, Beric sits in a tangle of weirwood roots in a cave full of weirwood roots when we first see him, which is just like Bloodraven. Beric is called the Lord of Corpses by the Ghost of High Heart, while Bloodraven is called the Corpse Lord in the scene when Bran first meets him, the one we quoted earlier. Beric has a missing eye, just like Bloodraven. Both wear black cloaks, though Bloodraven's doesn't have these stars and lightning. So many have noticed the parallels between Beric and Bloodraven, but I'm not sure that anyone has known what to make of it. I would submit that the likeness is there to tell us something about Azor Ahai. He was a resurrected and transformed fiery sorcerer who sat in a weirwood throne and wielded a flaming sword like Beric. He was a green seer, as Bloodraven is, and also someone with the blood of the dragon in his veins, as Bloodraven has, being that Azor Ahai comes from the original race of dragon riders from Ashai, of course. He was a Night's Watch brother in some fashion, like Bloodraven and Jon Snow as well. In fact, Jon Snow is kind of where a lot of these ideas lead to. He matches the sketch of Azor Ahai that we just laid out very well. First of all, Jon has the blood of the dragon in his veins through his genetic father, Rhaegar, although Ned will, of course, always be his real dad. Jon is a skin changer instead of a green seer, but I think the two are basically the same thing. Since Bran is really just skin changing a tree. It's just a difference in strength, in my opinion. And then, of course, Jon is killed and soon to be resurrected, and he dreams of, which is going to make him a zombie. He dreams of wielding a flaming sword, as we know. He has a wound in one eye, which would be the eagle attack from Clash of Kings. And of course, he has associations with weirwood through his Stark lineage and through his wolf, who has the coloring of a weirwood and is compared directly to the weirwoods by Jon. The biggest thing I'm curious about, of course, is what magic Jon will be resurrected with. Fire magic, ice magic, weirwood magic, or some combination of those. While I'm not sure of that, I am sure that his status as a skin changer will, of course, enable a full resurrection as opposed to Beric, who's more like a remnant of his former self. So I think it's very likely that Azor Ahai's theoretical status as a green seer would have enabled him to be resurrected in whatever terrible form that he happened to take. We find a very similar story when we decode the Ironborn mythology. The Grey King sat on a weirwood throne, transformed himself through taking possession of the fire of the gods in the forms of burning magic, a burning tree, the weirwood magic, and the black sea dragon meteorites, such as the sea stone chair. It's taken me a long time to sort through all the layers of this Ironborn folklore, but I believe that is what is at the heart of all of this. Fiery green seers, naughty ones who broke the moon in order to steal the fire of the gods for their own, and in doing so, transformed themselves and the entire world. And that's the Grey King and the Sea Dragon, guys. You may now unmute yourselves.
Hooray! And there was much rejoicing.
Hey. So, hey, Gretchen, thanks for jumping in. Sorry it took a little longer than I thought. We had half an hour of, crashed stream. And
I mean, I'm really not all that surprised. It always takes longer than you think. At least in my experience.
Yep, that's for sure. That is for sure. But thanks for jumping in.
Oh, yeah,
And
thanks for having me.
I want to kick off. Well, first, I guess let's check in with Sanrixian, and then I'll kick off with a question that I'll throw to everyone. So here we go.
All right. So we've got the Grey King, and I'm painting some colors on him now.
Nice.
Room. I'm trying to decide if we should put some flames in there. What do you think, LML?
Well, yeah, I mean, we kind of have to. Maybe we can get some like weirwood torch sconce looking things lining the sides of the stairs.
Yeah, I was thinking the same
weirwood
thing.
tiki torches.
Yes.
Yes. Done. All right. So we're gonna.
It's looking good though. I like the tones.
Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to do something Ironborn, and I know he's the Grey King, but Grey is so multifaceted. So it's like there has
green
to be
is
different.
Perfect.
Yeah, greens and blues and purples and.
Well, it's got like that watery, like it almost feels like you're in watery halls.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the colors that the drowned men, the drowned priests actually wear: the grays, the greens, and the blues. So that's perfect.
Which makes sense, being, green zombie symbols, wearing the gray, mottled gray and green.
Yeah, totally.
It's canon, officially.
It is now.
And I didn't do this on purpose, but I've been working on this blanket for my niece, and it is gray and green.
Yeah.
So, not on purpose. It's just everywhere in my life now.
And your hair is blue. And show us your awesome T-shirt. That looks kind of awesome.
This is Hecate.
What is it?
Hecate. She's one of the triple goddesses.
Oh yeah, no, I know. Yeah, your voice just lagged out. I know who Hecate is for sure.
Yeah, Hecate.
Nice.
Done by Medusa Dollmaker, one of my favorite artists. So highly recommend her stuff. She makes awesome T-shirts.
Yeah, I've seen a few of those.
Yeah.
They're awesome. So let me, and we'll continue to check in on Sanri's weirwood tiki torches here. But let me kick off the question to everyone. The question that I'm trying to get to, and I'll start with Gretchen since you just jumped on.
Mm-hmm.
What do you imagine is the literal connection between the weirwoods and the moon meteors? And this is an invitation for speculation and tinfoil. This is, we've covered lots of symbolism showing that the same person had both, whether it's Azor Ahai or the Grey King. But what does it actually mean? Do you suspect?
Meaning were the meteors used to open the weirwoods, or
Anything at all? Yep. Was it like, the meteors poisoned the land and the weirwoods had to react to it? Was it Azor Ahai with the magic? When he stabbed Nissa Nissa, the weirwood goddess, with the oily black meteorite sword, was that part of it, or was it?
I tend to be on the side of the goal was opening the weirwoods, and that the breaking of the moon and the meteors is unintended consequence. So like the desire for magic and that like fire of the gods had these like unintended consequences that ended up, breaking the world, like breaking the moon and then causing all of these other like disasters in the world that I don't think were the purpose of the events. That's where I tend to fall.
Okay, that's definitely a strong possibility. I've always thought that the moon breaking could have been an accident. That's sort of how the myth portrays it. He's trying to make Lightbringer, and he stabs Nissa Nissa, and she screams, and then the moon breaks. So it's almost like a fallout, side effect.
I always kind of thought the direct correlation between like what the meteors actually, the implication of, or the actual direct thing the meteors did to the weirwoods was corrupt them. Like they corrupted the soil and corrupted everything about them. So if one time like maybe it was like a peaceful thing and the green seers would go into the trees and the children's spirits could go into the trees, or something even like crazier than that, that could be a literal thing. Yeah.
I think that correlates really interestingly with more of one of the lines that I've been kind of pursuing, is the idea that like humanity in the weirwood is a poison.
Exactly.
And I think that the weirwood, the meteors being a poison and human beings in the weirwoods being a poison, like work really well as like corollary like events.
Yes. I absolutely think there's a strong possibility the weirwoods don't like being possessed and skin changed by people, and that it's almost like a mutually parasitic relationship.
And it kind of goes back to what you said about like, Azor Ahai, like or accessing the weirwoods, like that was the point of that would make sense. And then the trees being like corrupted from it, it all kind of ties together. I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, because then you have the trees being corrupted, you have the land potentially being corrupted as well, because whenever we see the oily black stone, there does seem to be some kind of like poison in the land, like seeping into the land. And so human beings are not only like corrupting the thing that they wanted to possess, but in some sense corrupting themselves and corrupting the environment and the world, like all at the same time.
I think the evidence of Ashai definitely points towards the fact that greasy black stone is toxic. It poisons the land, and the meteor impacts probably did. I mean, it's straight out of Lovecraft. That's what the meteors do in Lovecraft. So, and I know Amanda has uncovered a lot of links between the oily black stone and the shade of the evening trees. And I've always, my best guess about the shade of the evening trees is always that they represent at least corrupted weirwoods, and they could actually be literally corrupted weirwoods. And it could be that the weirwoods, to build on your idea, Gretchen, that the weirwoods in Westeros are holding back that corruption, and that the reason why it doesn't look like a shy is because the weirwoods are mitigating the poison. But Amanda, go ahead and pick up the torch here.
So yes, I think that there is definitely a corruption going on of the weirwood net. If you've seen my video on the shade of the evening and the black oily stone, there's a good possibility that the shade of the evening tree and the weirwoods were once possibly the same type of tree. There's a lot of symbolism pointing to a poisoning of that side of the weirwood net, and possibly a corruption of the whole thing in general. When you look at the House Blackwood and their tree is actually almost like a tool trying to inform us about the black-wooded trees. And so what happened to the blackwood tree?
It got poisoned.
It got poisoned, right? And when Victarion drinks Shade of the Evening, what does he tell his brother when he tries to taste it? He says, "Are you trying to poison me?" And then you have, and then what did the Dothraki call the sea, the ocean? What do they call it?
Poison water.
Poison
Poison
water.
water.
The poison water. And there's so many hints toward poison, especially with the shy. Where do a lot of the poisons come from?
From
Like
a
the
shy.
sprinkler from
Yeah.
a shy. There's all these little hints towards this poisoning, this like keyword of poison that you're going to kind of see throughout the series. And so just take a look at that. There's some hints. And now, so my best guess is that the meteors did poison the net. And there's definitely this fracture of the two trees. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it.
And
Well,
the
and
other,
on the
Oh,
idea
sorry.
of poison, I was just going to say, like, cyanide poisoning turns your lips blue, and also like your
Yes.
fingernails and fingertips. And what does Shade of the
Nice.
Evening do? But like turn their lips blue.
Their lips blue.
So like he's poisoning himself.
Exactly. So so there's a lot of hints towards the meteor, at least in my opinion, the meteor doing a poisoning of the land. And that's a lot of like what you're saying with your theory, David, is that the meteor did this kind of awful poisoning of the land. So it's
I mean, it's think of Oberon's spear, a great meteor symbol.
Mhm.
It's a steel spear, but the thing that gives it the likeness to oily black stone is that the tip is coated in black poison, which looks like black oil. So now you have a black oily spear, which is, great for my symbolism, but it's also, there's a poison component. There's a whole line of symbolism about snake bites. If you think about Sansa's hairnet and Joffrey's poisoning, Joffrey's poison came from symbolically Sansa's Medusa hairnet, which had the black amethyst jewels from a shy and all this. So it's layer upon layer of the same ideas. And then you also, now here's the cool thing, is that the weirwood roots, when Bran is down in there, are also described as grave worms. And grave worms basically eat corruption under the ground. So you can imagine the meteor poisoning the ground and the weirwood roots, like grave worms, basically eating the poison and transmuting it. And at the same time, the roots are also eating the green seer, which, Gretchen, as you pointed out, is essentially an analog for the poison, this fiery poison that's entered the weirwood net.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool. Well, I'm glad we settled that.
Yes. Painkiller
Um,
Jane pointed out that silver poisoning, like silver can poison as well.
It'll turn you
So-
blue.
Yep, it'll turn you blue. And what I think is really interesting is right now I'm diving a lot into medieval alchemy, and silver is the metal related to the moon.
Yeah,
of
Each
course.
of the planets have a metal, and silver is the moon's metal. And both madness and poisoning and things like that are also associated with the moon. So you have all of these things like going together. That's why in Lewis's Silver Chair, the book The Silver Chair, that's why you have silver. That's why you have people going crazy. Because that's each of Lewis's books correspond to one of the seven heavens in medieval alchemy. So
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big
Oh,
fan of C.S.
dude.
Lewis of the Narnia books. They were basically the first fantasy books that I read as a kid, and they always stuck with me.
yeah,
My favorite thing was the wood between the worlds, where they had all the pools and you could jump into different. And in fact, doesn't that sound a lot like Weirwood Green Sea symbolism?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of medieval alchemy. I send it David really funny finds all the time. Like, have you ever seen like the illustrated like books on alchemy?
No,
The
but I
text-
have
oh
to.
my god, I'll send you some on Twitter. They're amazing.
It's wild. Medieval
It is
alchemy
incredible.
is wild. Yep.
It's,
Our
it's-
little Twitter chat thread has been blowing up with it too. I think Emma has been looking at it.
Yep.
And we've been kicking some ideas around. I've touched on it a little bit, just a little here and there, but I haven't gone whole hog into that. There's just so many interesting lines of inquiry. There's a lot of stuff that I want to look into and just haven't gotten to yet. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
on
there's-
that list.
there's a lot in there. It takes
Yeah.
a while, so don't
Yeah.
feel bad.
Copper is the Venus metal. So again, fits really nicely with a lot of how we see copper being used with like Nissa Nissa and the Weirwoods, and like copper
red
seems to be
hair.
like
Yeah.
red hair. Like
Yeah.
yep.
It's just kind of like a visual way of doing your symbolism with words,
Yeah.
honestly. Like, it's, if you looked at it, you'd be like, oh, I get it.
Yep.
Yeah, and we're going to be getting to the under the sea stuff in Weirwood Compendium 5, Sea of Green Fire. So we are finally getting to that. And we're also, another great idea that comes from one of the Council of Starry Wisdom VIPs, Painkiller Jane, is what we call the penny tree idea. And this really gave birth to my whole concept of portals. And so we're going to be talking about penny tree. The cool thing about penny tree, which is of course where Dunk is from, or at least, I'm sorry, Sir Arlen, Dunk's like mentor or whatever. He's from Penny Tree. And Penny Tree is a town that sits right between the teats. The teats being Barbara's teats or Missy's teats, depending on if you're a Blackwood or a Bracken. But they're a pair of hills that look like boobs, apparently. And they are fought over by the Blackwoods and the Brackens. And they changed the name from Missy's teats to Barbara's teats based on who possesses them. But as I've alluded to, the two moons can be symbolized as two boobs. And the tree right in the middle of the boob mountains is actually supposed to be, yeah, I know, it's just impossible to talk about seriously, is supposed to be like the weirwood tree in between the two moons. And there's also, when you think of Nissa Nissa as the sword going into her breast, it's the same symbol between the two moons, and the weirwood being a portal between the two moons or between ice and fire. So there's a whole line of symbolism. And of course, the penny tree is a great weirwood symbol. The town Penny Tree is named after a tree that they call the penny tree, and they nail copper coins to it, if I'm not mistaken, which makes it a lightning rod and gives it the copper conductor symbolism and the copper red hair symbolism that you were just talking about. So it's pretty cool.
And sword symbolism too. Like you're coating it, like you're dipping wood into like metal. You're coating it with metal, and they used to make swords out of copper. So it makes sense, copper as a sword. And both of the Missy and Barba, they were both what's the proper mistresses of Aegon IV. So like we've got Aegon IV and his two. I mean, he had lots of them, but like that's the argument of like who was his favorite consort. Like it's the Bracken, no, it's the Blackwood. I believe that's where that's part of that whole story is like the feud over like which daughter of that one of those houses Aegon liked better.
Yeah, totally. And also the cool thing you mentioned, the poisoning of the Blackwood tree. Well, it was poisoned by the Brackens, but the Brackens have fiery horse symbolism in their sigil. And so it's basically like, and they're all randy too. They're like the Garth figure, like they're super randy and they have lots of offspring and they're all strong and robust and hairy and stuff. And then the Blackwoods are always emaciated and shit like their tree. So what's happening is the poisoning of the Blackwood tree by the Brackens is just another version of the thunderbolt setting the tree on fire or the meteor poisoning the weirwood net. It's the same mechanism essentially.
Nice.
Yeah.
You really, Lucy, for April Fool's Day, should just do a Boobs of Ice and Fire parody episode.
That the problem is it wouldn't even be a parody. It'd be dead serious. We could also do the poop episode, but that would be dead serious too, because George Martin uses poop symbolism. I've been protecting you good people of the mythical astronomy audience from all the poop symbolism that George put in the books. Some people like Ravenous Reader and Painkiller Jane would say that I am wrong to hold back the flood of poop symbolism from you all.
The brown flood.
The brown flood, but I am holding it back. And
the Lion of Lannister shit's gold. So there's.
Oh, dude, there's all kinds of stuff. There's all
a shame cube for a reason.
There's a shame cube for that. I think that's what started the shame cube.
It is.
It is.
Yeah, the cesspool symbolism.
Oh man,
Ravenous Reader.
It was actually me. I started it.
Well, in any case. Maybe that'll be the April Fool's or the Halloween episode or something. Yeah, it's
be beautiful.
Gonna have to rate it MA for sure. Like, don't let your kids hear this.
Please.
Open up the floodgates. Yeah, I'm gonna hold them back. I've got so many episodes that that I need to get out, like the Old Ones episode. I still haven't done the Zodiac episode, which is like
I
3/4
want that
written.
one.
I have been waiting for
know.
that for so long. You don't even
I
know.
know, I
Yeah.
know, but then I have to stop my whole series that I'm working on in order to do it, and it's always really hard for me to do that. So,
Isn't part of what you do though, like interrupting your own series to start new series and then going back?
That's
Yeah.
99% your brand.
I mean, it's true. It's true.
Just do it for us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try to get that going soon. I'll probably make that a Green Zombies episode. Both of those, in fact, the Zodiac, Children of Garth the Green, and the Old Ones. And yeah, Amanda, I don't know if we're going to get into Old Ones, but you mentioned something that you're working on coming out soon. So give us at least a light preview of what you were talking about to me the other day.
Yes. Well, so I have some ideas on what the Dothraki Sea landscape might have looked like many thousands of years ago. And so it's pretty surprising for some people that aren't familiar with how plains regions are formed. But if you want to do some research ahead of time, just look at how the Great Plains were formed. But there's also some interesting stuff between the people of Ib and the Hairy Men, and also the people of Sarnor. And if you take a look at Lovecraft's tale of the doom that came to Sarnath, you might get some good ideas of some of the interplay between those two people, or those two groups of people from many thousands of years ago. And so I'm going to be taking a look at that, and we may be looking at a few things with the legend of Huzor Amai, who was a Sarnori hero. And yeah, so take a look at that.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think George Martin is doing something fun with Lang and all these tall people, from the Maze Makers to the Sarnori to the Langi. And it's not really important for the main story, I don't think. But it is a fun sort of world building Easter egg that he's definitely putting in there and working on in multiple places. So it's like there's this whisper of a vanished type of human being that was like 8 or 9 feet tall or so. I think those are the Green Men, perhaps.
Yeah.
And that's our one chance of them becoming relevant, is that if we go to the Isle of Faces and we see some really tall elf looking people of some kind, that'll be kind of like, oh, there they are. But yeah, I think it all goes back to Lang and the Great Empire of the Dawn and the Old Ones and that shit. So I did half of that idea with Quinn on an Ideas of Ice and Fire stream a few months ago. Some of you may have remembered that.
I love that one.
Yeah, that was only half of it. There's a whole bunch more. But anytime the phrase "Old Ones" appears in the books, there's crazy stuff going on. So Bronsteries the Wise has a good question. He wants us to kick around the Argoth and Uthor myth. And that's one that Amanda talked about in her story. So he asks, what roles are Argoth and Uthor playing? Argoth is gray. That's Argoth Stoneskin, the gray giant. So is he the Azor Ahai Grey King figure? Does Azor Ahai get Nissa Nissa stolen from him and then pursue her? Or is Azor Ahai the stealer? Either way, who is Azor Ahai's rival? A Garth figure? So Bronsteries, that's a good question. So just to recap the myth, Argoth Stoneskin, the Grey Giant, who sounds a lot like the Grey King, wins the tournament and is supposed to get the hand of Maris the Maid, who's a daughter of Garth the Green. But instead, Uthor gets her. It's not said how, but he like takes her or makes off with her or something. And so instead, we've got Uthor, who's an obvious call out to Uther Pendragon, who's a wife stealer as well, an Arthurian myth. So who's who in the archetypal struggle? I've wondered about this because the High Towers have the same symbolism as the Danes do, which is like white dragon symbolism, or what you might call Amethyst Empress loyalist symbolism. They seem to be dragon people on the side of Westeros who oppose Azor Ahai, which could line up with the idea that that the Grey King is the Azor Ahai figure. So running with that idea, we have seen a very famous setup where you've got a Solar King and a Nissa Nissa wife, and you have an interloper stealing the wife. Okay, and this would be Robert and Jaime and Cersei. So Robert is the Solar King. He's a Garth-like Solar King. And then he has a white sword figure who's the Comet. come and basically steal his Fire Moon Maiden, Cersei. And so sometimes we see Azor Ahai holding a sword, and this represents the sun holding the comet. And it's basically one figure. But other times we see the comet as this interloper, stealer person who comes and steals the wife of the Sun King for himself. We've seen it a few times, and I think that that is what that myth is talking about. So there is a configuration. So then the question becomes, who is the Azor Ahai figure? Is it Robert or is it Jaime? And what is the original guy we think of Azor Ahai? Did he steal the wife? I think so. I think Azor Ahai would be the comet. He'd be the stealer, right? Like, because Nissa seems like an elf woman, and Azor Ahai seems like he took her. But Amanda, what do you think?
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on there. First of all, just right off the bat, Jaime is definitely the Azor Ahai figure. He is the one that takes the Fisher King wound, and he actually undergoes a transformation of himself, and he even undergoes a rebirth in water. If you remember when he passes out in the pool with a maiden in a pool, Brienne, who also helps resurrect or save him. He was called the Kingslayer, and when he passes out and she helps wake him up, he goes, "My name's Jaime." And he changes his whole persona, and so you see this like rebirth going on with the maiden in the pool resurrecting. It's perfect symbolism right there with Jaime. And like I said,
he turns gray later. He gets the gray hair.
Exactly. Exactly. And he becomes very gaunt. He becomes a changed man. And, we're seeing a little bit of a changing in his character as the story goes on. And it's pretty cool to actually see that play out. And of course, when I talk about in my video with Garth the Green and the Grey King, Robert is definitely that fertile type of character where, he's wearing horns and siring all these children, and he's, fat and jolly and happy and all this stuff. So Jaime would definitely be playing the Grey King. Robert Baratheon would definitely be that Garth the Green character. Now going over to Argoth Stoneskin and Uthor of the High Tower, Argoth Stoneskin is going to be your Grey King character. It's mostly when you just take a look at the name itself, the Argoth, the Grey Giant, and then you have this woman who is the maiden who's giving you that Helen archetype, who's also got that sea reference within her name. So it's stated in the myth that her hand was supposed to go to the Grey King or to Argoth Stoneskin, but Uther got her. So he's basically playing the role of like a King Menelaus, where he's trying to get that woman back, and it's most likely that he did get this woman back. Okay, because first of all, there's all this stuff about this Battle Isle, this pirate lore that was on the Raven Ree Island. You have all this myth surrounding that. He was roaring and raging outside of Old Town, and then you have this storm myth and this woman resurrecting this man. So he probably, most likely, in my opinion, he most likely was able to get her back. And it said that in the Grey King myth that he taunted the storm god, who lashed out with a thunderbolt, causing a tree to burn. So now this taking back of this Helen character is probably what caused the wrath of the storm god, which is most likely this Garth type character, in my opinion. So really the Grey King is responsible for the breaking of the world, but there's also another player involved. And so that's basically how I'm seeing how this is actually playing out, because this storm god, drowned god duality is actually played out in two different characters, the Grey King and Garth. So you kind of have it like that. That makes any sense? Did that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And even the Knights Queen setup with Knights King also has Brandon the Breaker, who's the brother of Knights King. So you have the brothers fighting mixed with this stolen woman idea. And there's definitely more trios like that. Oh, I see Gretchen wanting to talk.
Oh yeah. Okay, I have thoughts. I've been like, because what's super interesting is that the same archetype that you're talking about actually functions really well in the situation of a child, because we also see that the Azor Ironborn archetype And all of that applies to, and the stranger, like, yes, the comet is often Azor Ahai, but the comet also represents the stranger, which can represent a child being born. And so when you have like a king and his wife and a child that is born, that is like in some sense like the image of the father, is a way of talking about resurrection, rebirth. And if that wife dies in childbirth, then you could say that like the child stole his mother, stole the life of his mother.
Which
Like
they
we
say
see
about Tyrion.
right. And that's what I was thinking of with Tyrion. Like Tywin is so angry at Tyrion, like hates Tyrion because he sees Tyrion as like stealing his wife. Because if Tyrion had not been born, Joanna would not have died. So there's like a really interesting like double mythological like storyline going on where you can imagine it as two brothers, or it can be thought of the same triad of people can be thought of as a father and a mother and then the child. And if the child is the one that like kills the mother in some sense in childbirth.
Totally.
And then the child being born is like that reborn figure of like it's a usurper who's like stepped in and is now like the replacement.
And this seemed like confusing to me at first when I first started discovering this idea that you could take the same basic astronomical event and spin it all these different ways. But then I realized, like, of course it has to work like that, or else the books would be really stupid. They would have the same exact thing happening over and over and over. So it has to be flexible enough to fit different scenarios. One in which Azor Ahai is a bad guy and others in which he's a good guy. Like we talked about that. Joffrey was the quintessential evil version of Azor Ahai. But Dantos was an Azor Ahai figure who was actually kind of rescuing Sansa, even though he was self-interested, or when he protected her by hitting her with the Morningstar melon, and she was thanking him, even though this was a clear Nissa Nissa stabbing scene. So that's the whole point, is to be able to spin it off and to fit all the different scenes that need to happen in the books. So if you're going to try to copy this sort of symbolism stuff in your own writing, you young writers, make sure you got to keep it flexible so that it doesn't become all like a robotic plot that's just doing the same thing over and over. So great points, Gretchen.
Right. Well, because real mythology, like historical mythology, works the same way, where like various cultures around the world can in some sense see the same event. If you have a global catastrophe event, like globally catastrophic event, various cultures can experience the same event and mythologize it in different ways. And some of them it might be positive, and some of them it might be negative, and in some of them it might be more neutral. And Martin is basically just recreating what actual historical mythology looks like, where various cultures can look at the same thing and come up with different symbols. So of course we've got different stories for the same event, because that's what happens.
Well said. Well said. I don't even have anything to add. It's so well said. But Amanda did talk
I was
about
muted.
That. What's that?
Sorry, I was muted. I was just going to say it was like the flood myth, like the quintessential example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Amanda talked about how nature cycles can be the brothers fighting, or it can be the goddess of spring going into the underworld, like Persephone. And it's just different ways of describing the same thing. And that is why mythology is fun and cool, in my opinion. So, yeah. Bron Steries.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say Bron Steries approves of our discussion based on his question, but carry on.
Yeah. I was just going to say, what I love is that Martin gives us like a funny way of looking at this is the way that we actually get the perspective of certain of the warged wolves. Like we get the perspective of like Bran inside Summer trying to understand human events and like astronomical events and coming up with like a very like wolfy way of looking at things. But if you see the same thing from the perspective of a human being, it sounds very different. Like it's the exact same thing. Like the perspective of like a wolf with his like wolf brain isn't going to understand that like a dragon didn't literally come up from Winterfell. It was just fire. But like the wolf's perspective and the human perspective is just the same way of saying it's like humans. We all have different perspectives on the same event, and it's going to sound different based on like what we bring to it, what we assume about what's going on.
Yeah. And I think after thinking about it long and hard, I do think that it's definitely not a dragon. I look, that was one of the tinfoils I indulged for a long time. I tried to think of ways that maybe, but I think it's just all symbolism, because there's a perfect symbolic reason to show dragons waking from Winterfell, as we've seen in the Moons of Ice and Fire and Blood of the Udder series.
Blood
As
of the
in-
udder, like the
yeah. No, we already
blood
did
of
that
the
whole.
cow.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like Mithras.
Yeah, we did this on a live stream when I said blood of the udder and it became a whole thing. So let's not do that again. But in any case, we do know that that there's good reason to see dragon symbolism coming out of Winterfell. And you're right, it's just a cool way that an animal piles of man rock and a
Steel
river,
skin.
yeah, all that. So Amanda, you were trying to say something a minute ago. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and this was just a little while ago, when we were talking about you mentioned how sometimes it's brothers fighting and sometimes it's the abduction of a woman that causes that the cycling of the seasons, that the winter to happen. With the tale of Persephone, she's obviously brought into the underworld, but she becomes the wife of the death god, the god of the underworld, Hades. And one of the things I did in my video with the Great King and Garth the Green Hand, and show how the Great King is not necessarily the embodiment of what you would consider a sea god, but he's actually the embodiment of what you might more consider as a death god. And there's lots of death god symbology. If you just look at all the sigils, all of the reaper symbolism, the scythes, you look at everything surrounding the Ironborn religion and culture, there's a lot of death going on there. And so when you have Hades, who's lord of the underworld, abducting this maiden, you're given another kind of reference to the Great King and this maiden that he abducts. So it's kind of a good, George is doing a good, providing a lot of good symbolism for the Great King and this abduction. So ultimately it is Menelaus who eventually, it is the Great King who eventually does get Helen and get her back. So it's almost like they're both in a conflict, but trying to get this woman. And it's very interesting because you'll see different dynamics in the storyline with different men, such as Harald the Huntsman and Harald the Handsome, and Herndon of the Horn and Harald the Hunter. Yeah, Harald the Hunter and Herndon of the Horn is another example. They shared a woman, and as long as they shared this woman, they were able to live forever. So that's another spin on this myth. So you can just see these different dynamics kind of playing out. But anyway, sorry, I'm starting to go off on a tangent.
No, that's cool. And I was just going to go back to the Jamie. He also has not only the rebirth scene in the pool, but also the dream, which he has on the Weirwood Stump. He starts off in ankle deep water in the bowels of Casterly Rock. Bowels. Yes, bowels. And they actually pick up the flaming swords that him and Brienne wield from under the water. So this is very similar to the idea of the Grey King and the Drowned God bringing fire from the ocean. Like I said, the sea dragon falls into the ocean and then the fire comes out of the ocean, possessed by the Grey King or the Drowned God. It's very similar here, where Jamie goes into the Weirwood net by putting his head on the Weirwood Stump, and then he picks up a sword out of the water, and it's a sword of pale fire. So pretty great stuff. I will eventually get into all that, but of course, first we have to break open the entire Under the Sea line of symbolism, which again, we're going to do in the next episode, which will be Weirwood Compendium 5. Shout out to Ravenous Reader, aka Raven 6.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that.
It's gonna be fun. I'm really fired up about it. I'm gonna be pumped for sure. It's not gonna be. It's fun because I started writing it 2 years ago, but then revisiting it now, I can juice it up quite a bit. But it's gonna get into some of the Green Sea stuff that the Dothraki Sea and the Prince that was promised. And the Rhaegal, Dany's child, or Rhaego, the child that was, not born, and also a lot of the other Green Dragon stuff, and a little Quentin Martell, and it's gonna be fun.
Yay!
The Dothraki might be one of the smartest cultures in Essos, though, because they shun both the woods and the ocean, and it's just good job, guys. Yeah, stay away from those things. Those things are bad news.
They're smart. They've seen the horror movies.
Yeah. Yeah. They're like, we know what happens in the woods and when you go in the poison water.
Yes, and
Fire.
and their culture will not even plow the earth either. So there's, you know, they don't even want to go in there.
No. Leave sleeping stone giant sleeping. Probably a good idea.
Let them lie.
Yep.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts in that last section that I read was the moon dancer one. I mean, it's like sun and moon colliding in the air, falling to earth. You got a green dancing moon dragon. Then she gets the weirwood stigmata with the eyes and the, blind and bleeding. I mean, it's pretty.
Oh, you had, if you don't mind, you had mentioned like dragons singing, and like you had talked about green dragons, and I don't know if I've ever mentioned like traditionally green dragons are considered like lower rank, and they also are related to the earth. I think sometimes in symbolism.
I love you, Rexian.
You just gotta embrace the mistakes.
I literally just bit my tongue.
That's good. That's good. Weirwood stigmata symbolism. It's fine.
I turned 30 Saturday.
Good save. Good save.
All right. So anyway, yeah, singing dragons is totally a thing. Like it's in some mythologies and some fantasy novels, it's related to like mating calls. And then there's this great children's book I've had since I was 8 called The Dragons Are Singing Tonight. And it's got a nice poem about singing dragons. And they're just like any culture that writes about dragons that are kind of like a good type of dragon. So like postmodern fiction, I would say there's a lot about singing. And I'm done talking about dragons and embarrassing myself and going back to painting.
Oh, you're never done embarrassing yourself, Sanrixian. Don't say that.
That is the truest thing I've ever said.
And of course, none of us are ever done. That's why we go live on YouTube.
Right.
To serve up the embarrassment. People like it. So tell us what your, just back up a little bit and show us the progress here on.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Nice.
Nice.
I like
so we
the
got
torches.
the torches.
That's pretty
There we
sick.
go. Oh, nice.
Doing some detail painting on him, and then I'll do the chair and then make the torches really shine.
Okay.
I love it.
Maybe just a little more white on some of the highlights so we get the white weirwood back a little bit. It's very, very under the sea right now. But
Look, Lucy, I work dark and then I bring the light.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right, that's all I'm gonna say. That's all the secrets I'm gonna reveal. Actually, just kidding. I hope these videos help as inspiring artists who work digitally to try, because I can kind of show my process,
Yeah, you get a really nice organic look from it,
Yeah, I try. I like watercolor brushes. That's definitely one of my favorite things.
Yeah, you seem to be pretty effective with them. It's great.
I try. I'm a wizard.
Yeah.
You are a wizard.
Yeah,
a wizard of the paintbrush.
So let's talk about weirwood a little bit. We find weirwood throne in Grey King's Hall via symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
Then we find a weirwood throne in the Eyrie, which is an ice moon place, obviously. Then in the White Sword Tower, which is a whole bunch of ice moon symbolism. That's where the Kingsguard live in King's Landing. Everything is white, including a giant white weirwood table in the shape of a shield that they all gather around. The only thing that isn't white is Jaime's chair, which is black oak. And under the black oak chair is exactly where he pulls Oathkeeper, the black sword, when he gives it to Brienne. So you know what I'm going to say now. That's obviously the dragon locked in ice symbolism that we always find. But I'm curious about the weirwood. I'm finding dead weirwood specifically in ice moon places, because I think Old Wick has basically turned into an ice moon place at this point. Like it's now cold and barren, kind of like the dragon that's locked in the ice moon symbolism. Maybe like Winterfell post after it's burning and when it gets snowed over. It's similar. Like I picture Old Wick having burned in the past and now it's kind of cold and forlorn. And so we find this dead weirwood symbol in the Eyrie and in at Old Wick. and in the White Sword Tower, and I want to say there might be a couple of other places too. There's a weirwood face that looks dead under the wall, which is obviously an ice moon symbol. We also find frozen weirwoods in a couple of places. That one of them's in the Varamir prologue, a pale shadow of a weirwood armored in ice, which is double others symbolism. So what do you guys think of this whole link between dead weirwood and ice moon places? Do the others like kill the weirwood trees somehow, or what?
Well, I definitely think the others are tied to the Children of the Forest and the weirwoods. I definitely see that. And I see a lot of symbolism with the white swords and the weirwoods themselves. And so I definitely think that I see links between those swords and the weirwoods. One thing that I do kind of, just me, because I always think about like the Grey King and Naga in that scene with Jaime, and he's in this completely white area. He has a weirwood table, so it's like white and weirwood, except for this black chair. Now, I personally think that the black oily stone was at one point the shade of the evening tree. And so what I kind of see is the Grey King in Naga, in this white enclosed with weirwood, but sitting on this black wood chair. So I kind of see this hinting towards the Grey King, and Jaime Lannister is of course a heavy Azor Ahai type Grey King character. So I think, in my opinion, I kind of see it hinting towards that Naga relationship and that black wood type of a relationship.
And it's also similar to the whole concept of the black meteor entering the weirwood net and poisoning it, like we were talking about today, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes me think of like weirwood doesn't die, it just turns to stone, which is, I mean, turning to stone is just its way of dying. Like it doesn't, like, not unlike a tree, like a non-weirwood tree that just like dies after, however long, like a weirwood will eventually petrify and turn to stone. But that's just another way of talking about like weirwoods just die a different kind of death, where they, in a sense, like freeze, they petrify, they become stuck. So I think there's something to do with like freezing. Maybe Joe Magician, if Joe Magician would here, could talk about his thoughts about time and freezing time and like the relationship between like the others and kind of Westeros being frozen or locked in some sense in time. That's definitely something I'm thinking about. And so seeing like a frozen tree or a tree that's turning to stone feels just like a way of symbolizing that. Something that is being locked or frozen in one particular moment rather than being allowed to actually fully age and die. And
yeah, so there's two different instances where the weirwoods are described as pale giants frozen in time. So that's direct description of them. And I've described them as looking like a burning person, sort of, that burns eternally but isn't consumed, just like the burning bush or like a glass candle. So that seems to be something that's going on. I also talked about the wall as a road that with no beginning and no ending, which makes it like a frozen Ouroboros or an ice dragon Ouroboros. So yeah, I think the others can. And the long night is basically a stopping of time in the sense that it doesn't go today, like it's stuck at night and stuck on winter and doesn't like progress. So,
So seeing wood that is not allowed to decay, a wood that turns to stone instead of decaying the way normal wood should, is another way of talking about like it's frozen, it's stuck, it's just exists forever rather than actually decaying naturally the way that most of the things that we associate with doing. I think the other way to look about that, like being the burning person frozen in their death, is we see that with the two people that we know who are resurrected are in some sense like locked or frozen in like the final thoughts or moments or goals of their death with Beric and Stoneheart. So they're in some sense like resurrected but still frozen in time. Even though they're living, they're still frozen kind of in that final moment of their death. So, yeah.
Very cool. So there you go. There's and so much is made of the fact that the weirwood won't grow in the Eyrie. So it's like we're supposed to notice that it's not just a weirwood throne, but it's a dead version of one. The live weirwood throne is the one Bran sits in. This is specifically a dead weirwood throne in a place where weirwood does not grow. So I'm going to follow that line of symbolism more. But yeah, it does seem to have something to do with the others being able to like freeze the weirwood net or whatever. So let me find this. Let's see. Pale shadow, armored in ice, a search of ice and fire. You're the best. When Vermeer pushed at it, the snow crumbled and gave way, still soft and wet. Outside, the night was white as death. Pale, thin clouds danced attendance on a silver moon, while 1,000 stars watched coldly. So that's all other symbolism. Pale, thin, dancing clouds with cold star eyes. So then he could see the humped shape of other huts buried beneath drifts of snow, and beyond them, the pale shadow of a weirwood armored in ice. To the south and the west, the hills were vast white wilderness where nothing moved except the blowing snow. And then and a minute later, when he invades Thistle, it says fingers of frost were climbing up the weirwood. So it's almost like the image of the others phrasing the weirwood, armoring it in ice, turning it into a pale shadow. It tells you at once that the weirwoods and the others are joined, but it also shows you the weirwoods being frozen. So I think that's a pretty important quote there. I love that one.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also that weaponization of the tree too, when it says it's armored in ice. There's also kind of that weaponization of the tree as well, which is really cool.
Oh yeah.
Verbiage.
Right. Kind of like if you freeze water, you could turn it into an ice dagger. I mean,
Yes,
like things that are frozen become weapons.
That's right. White knife, frozen hard beyond the firth.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Well, Sanrixian, how are we doing here? Oh yeah, this is another San Sephany style masterpiece here. We didn't get any silly drawings, but that's okay. We can, yes, a different time we can do the Old Man of the River, George Martin Turtle.
I was gonna say, like, Weirwood Submarine was such an epic masterpiece in the like silly drawings that I think it's gonna last us for a little while.
Yeah, that one was good. It was definitely epic. What can I say? If you missed that one, you got to go back to last week's YouTube stream and check it out. It even spanned 2 streams. It started with my stream and finished on Amanda's stream, right? Isn't that what happened?
It did. Yes. Yeah. And it was everything we had hoped it had been. It was everything.
So good.
And, one thing, we may have a good opportunity to do the Old Man of the River picture when I ever get the chance to talk about or do a video on the Old Man of the River and the Crab King and the Clarence Crab and the King of Duskendale, who had the wife that would kiss heads to life and do all that fun stuff. If I ever get to that point, that'd be a good spot too to do the Old Man of the River. But
Yeah.
Sam, so let's go ahead and before we get out of here, let's clean up some questions that I probably missed in the chat. So if you've got some, go ahead and throw them in. Gregory Namuth asks, Sam is a moon person that has a bloody burning hand that bleeds from the mouth. Is he another Azor Ahai symbol? Yeah, he often plays that role of a moon person turning into Azor Ahai reborn, which is one of the paths that we can follow. And then he's got a bit of gender bending symbolism, of course. And he is most notably a Night's Watchman. If you remember, they dreamt one of my favorite moon symbolisms for Sam, besides his moon face that he has on 4 occasions, is when his father was abusing him and brought in alchemists who made him bathe in bull's blood. So that's a great moon drowning in blood symbolism for Sam right there. Obviously horrific in terms of the abuse that's going on, but the symbolism is really good. So as is often the case, it's always violent.
Sam also has a drowning scene as well. So he goes overboard. So first of all, he's fighting with his brother. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So
that's right.
He's fighting with a brother, and and he's getting the best of his brother, but he eventually goes overboard, and he's saved by a Summer Islander. And when the Summer Islander saves him, Sam is worried that the Summer Islander is mad because he ruined his feather cloak. So you have this cloaked man, And the Summer Islander plays the Shrouded Lord in that scene. And he's like, it's okay. You made me laugh. It made me laugh inside to see you punch the singer. And so it's a really neat little scene where that Summer Islander is actually playing the role of the Shrouded Lord in that little scene. So, yeah.
Sam's also got that good other symbolism of like taking baby monster from the wall, rescuing the baby.
Which is totally a last hero thing. And he is the 13th person to make it back from Craster's Keep. I counted that out in Green Zombies one time. Like most everyone else gets back first, and then he shows up later, but he's actually the 13th. So he's pretty strong.
He's a wife stealer. Yeah, and he's a wife stealer too.
Oh, I suppose he is. I suppose he is, isn't he? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Although that one we're calling justified because she came willingly, and Craster was, kind of horrible.
Well, that plays with that whole thing about like, is it willing or is it kidnapping? I mean, that
right, Rhaegar and Lyanna, right?
Yeah, and there are several other times when that comes into play. I think that's always a question that Martin is having us asking is like whether or not the wife goes willingly or is stolen depends very much on the perspective of the person who's talking, because from the perspective of Robert and Craster, like, yeah, their bride was stolen, but maybe from the perspective of Lyanna, she went willingly because she didn't want to be with them. Like, it all depends on who you're asking. She can be both stolen and willing, depending on who's talking. And
that goes back to the question Bron Steres asked me a while ago. He's like, do you think George has any original Azor Ahai Nissa Nissa scenario in mind as, quote, like the right answer? Or is he just giving all of us the permutations because that's how mythology works? I tend to suspect it's the latter. I'm kind of on the fence about it. It does seem like there should be an original story, and we'll probably know that better once we get the end of this story and can draw the parallels between however this one's resolved and the original myths. But it's the kind of like what you're saying, Gretchen, like it's almost more about telling all the different variations of it than it is having a right answer.
Yeah, I would say that if Martin has one in mind, I would be disinclined to think that he would tell us, because I think the point is not what actually happened, but the point is what people think happened and how that influences their choices and decisions. Like, what really happened historically matters far less than what the various people think happened, because that's what determines their choices. So even I think if he has an idea in mind, I don't think we'll ever know it. I would be really surprised if he told us, because I think that would in some sense destroy the mystery. And it's that mystery that he wants us to think about, is to think about like the perspectives are what matter.
And he's so interested in he's so interested in the juxtapositions too, like the ice and fire, light and dark, black fire, frozen fire. So burning, cold.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's the like with Morning Comes Mistfall, like his short story, where like the conclusion of the story is once they figure out what is really going on, like it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone just kind of like leaves Mistfall because the planet is no longer interesting. So I would be very, very much surprised if he ever told us what really happened. Like, I think we can come close to kind of fitting the pieces, but I think there's always going to be ambiguity, because that ambiguity is the point.
Yep. And someone is a compliment for Amanda. Mainstream Hypocrisy says, I hope we have an original story. I think The Disputed Lands has laid out my favorite version of it so far. So good job, Amanda.
Yay, Amanda.
Woohoo!
So there was another good question from earlier. Joe asked, are the moon meteors used through an intentional process to allow humans to access the Weirwood net, or is it a side effect? And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It does a mystery. I mean, maybe Azor Ahai took a black oily stone turned into Lightbringer the sword and then carved the first face, right? So I don't know. It could be. I tend to think, so we have the Bloodstone Emperor worshiping the Black Stone. And this seems to be post-transformation. Like, this is after the Long Night has fallen. He's already a necromancer. He's practicing dark magic. He's worshiping the Black Stone. So it could be that Azor Ahai was able to resurrect himself or enter the Weirwood net when people couldn't enter before, because the Black Stone gave him some sort of sorcerous powers. It could be something more direct like that. or like Joe Magicians talked about the whisper jewels, right? So when Azor Ahai stabs Nissa Nissa, it says that Lightbringer absorbs her soul and her spirit. So it could be that the sword is then powerful, because I've said Nissa Nissa is an elf woman. She's a weirwood goddess. She's connected to the weirwood trees. And this may have been why Azor Ahai sought her out to use her for the blood magic ritual. So maybe once he's killed her, the sword then becomes important because it has her soul in it. So then maybe he killed himself with the sword. Maybe he stuck it in the tree. Maybe he killed a sacrifice with it. I'm not sure. But it does seem like there's a possibility for a literal connection there. But I also think that the poisoning idea we've said earlier makes a little more sense and fits better with George's story. And there's a lot of evidence for that. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's awesome. Like, I love that idea of her soul actually being in the sword. Like, it doesn't have to be like a whispered jewel or anything like that. It can still be what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
But it can also be like that happened too. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome.
Well, that's kind of like what Maester Mary has been playing with, the idea of like pieces of like the shadow on the soul, like the pieces of people's selves can somehow be like attached to things magically, which is just another way to talk about, like, you know, children are shadows of their parents. They're what remains of their parents, like the way they were raised and their parents' personality. Like, it's just a magical way of talking about, in some sense, like a piece of you living forever. Or as my partner, who does not know much about A Song of Ice and Fire, when I was trying to talk to him about this, was like, oh, like a Horcrux. I was like, kind of. I mean,
Yeah, it's definitely an old
Kind of.
like close. But I do think there's that element that Martin is playing with, the idea that like someone's soul can, or a piece of their spirit or their self can somehow be like magically attached to things, or maybe not even magically, like just somehow like connected to a specific thing. So some part of Nissa Nissa going into the sword, like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's what the myth says. I mean, and then we have the weapons in the hands of the ancient Ironborn that drank the souls of those they slew. So the idea is repeated again.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So just the point is like, what do you do with it? I speculated that Dawn's ultimate purpose might be not in chopping people, but rather as a magical implement. You could almost think of it as a white glass candle, because it's milk glass and it glows. And the obsidian candles have so much sword symbolism. I've wondered if like Dawn has, you know, magical ward powers. Maybe it's connected to the magic that made the wall. That would make sense if it's original ice, and bringing it north is going to do something. So, you know, maybe it kills dragons. But I definitely think Dawn, there's a strong chance that Dawn's ultimate purpose is not just that it's an unbreakable sword, but that it does something magical.
That's
If we're
awesome.
going to see Dawn, that's the theory I favor.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism with Nissa Nissa and the weirwood, and possibly Nissa Nissa going into the weirwood. There's also a lot of symbolism between weirwoods and, you know, swords and white swords and what have you. So that symbolism with Nissa Nissa going into the weirwood, it might actually be the symbolism of Nissa Nissa going into the sword.
Yeah, it's parallel.
That's
It's
possible.
parallel.
So there's also that, which is really interesting. There's somebody at my door, but that parallel is kind of interesting as well. It's probably somebody that wants to play with my kids.
Go ahead. We'll cover it for you.
Okay. All right.
So the other thing that's interesting is that, think about the last hero. He ends up with the broken sword, fleeing to others, right? Then he gets help from the children of the forest, and then he appears victorious with the first Night's Watch. He's got dragon steel, and he's winning the war for the Dawn. So I believe that one of the things the children helped him with is they helped him with the resurrection. They helped the last hero and his buddies become the first green zombies with resurrection. But he also gained a sword, or fixed a sword, or reforged it, or did something in that time period also. So there's a strong clue that there's a sword involved. Now, Jamie, when he has his weirwood dream, goes into a watery underworld and picks up a sword out of the sea that is made of pale fire. And then we have Lady Stoneheart, as Painkiller Jane points out, sitting in Barrick's weirwood cave, staring at Oathkeeper. which she's probably going to give back to Jamie or Brienne when they leave the Weirwood Cave after whatever goes down goes down. So maybe even like stuck into Stoneheart's chest and set on fire if you like, tinfoil. But the point is there. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, when Jamie first gave Brienne Oathkeeper, they were in the White Sword Tower, which is a big weirwood tree and a white sword symbol at the same time. So we have this idea of like, you can get a black sword out of a white tree, or you can find a flaming sword inside the weirwood net, or you can get resurrected by the children of the forest and come out with Dragonsteel. So I think there's a thing here about going through the weirwood net, coming back out, being like a sword being reforged, but there is also an actual sword in there. So that's probably...
Sorry, is that kind of like a portal? The weirwood net is a portal?
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No,
Sorry.
on brand. That's it.
No, it just was like clicking in my head. I like it.
Mhm.
That's where this is going, for sure.
Oh, yes.
We're trying to figure out who went in the weirwood net, who came out as what, who turned into what. Is Nissa Night's queen? Did Azor Ahai birth the others from inside the weirwood net? We find people going in and coming out, and we find transformations happening in between, broken swords becoming reforged. So that's what we're trying to get to with Signs and Portals, is what's going on inside the weirwood net, essentially.
Like Patchface.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things he says is like, I will lead the group that goes under the sea and out again. And so we've got our Azor Ahai fool talking about going under the sea and coming back out again.
That is it. 100%.
Anybody else really scared for that chapter?
Which
I'm gonna
chapter?
need a pillow. If that ever happens in the books, if he ever goes under the sea, like if we ever get to see this being played out with words, I'm gonna need a pillow and like a candle or something. I'm gonna be so scared.
We'll turn all the lights on in the house.
Yeah. Get like a Care Bear plushie to like keep you company.
Oh yeah. Or just my giant dog. That could work too.
Yeah. A real
And
dog.
of course, I have to think about both the Bran Stalker or Barnstalker myth, where a famous sword is literally pulled out of a tree. It's associated with a burning brand and a burning sword, and then of course the sword in the stone. When you have a stone tree, you have to think about that. And Arthur got his other sword from the Lady of the Lake, who is a goddess that lives underwater. So
Not watery throwing out.
And a flaming sword is what guards the way back into the Garden of Eden. An angel with a flaming sword. So the sword appears after you have Adam and Eve ejected from the garden for stealing the fire of the gods from the magic tree, and then you have a being standing and essentially guarding the path back in, because they should not be allowed.
And that also reminds you of this simultaneous sword and shield Night's Watch thing, where they're the sword in the darkness and the shield that guards the realms of men. So I think that's something that George is riffing on. Mainstream Hypocrisies dropped some delightful tinfoil in the chat. Lucifer means Lightbringer. Do you think Lightbringer could be used to imprint a soul instead of drink it, as in bringing back the original hero in a new body? So if it drinks Nissa's spirit, can it spit it back out into a corpse? If Nissa is Night's queen, then this is an idea that could have legs, perhaps. You could picture Night's King as Azor Ahai actually creating Night's Queen with his sword and putting that spirit back out. I favor the idea that her spirit's really in the weirwood net, and that it comes back out of the weirwood net as Night's Queen, if she does turn into Night's Queen. So there's also the separation of the body and the spirit. So maybe Corpse Queen is running around with Nissa's corpse, but not her spirit, or vice versa. It's Nissa's spirit come out of the weirwood net into somebody else's body. There's all kinds of possibilities, wonderful and horrific possibilities that George Martin has opened up for us.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Looks like you're putting fire in the Grey King's Hall here, Senrixian.
Yes, I am now lighting
Nice.
vaguely where the torches would light.
Cool.
Doing my best.
I think we're going to wrap this up fairly shortly here in the next 5 minutes or so. It looks like you are coming to, I know you might further refine it, but it looks like we are coming down the home stretch here.
Yep. Probably refine it a little further, so it'll probably be on Twitter later today. I might go take a nap.
I will say it's got kind of a show Iron Throne vibe to it, which I kind of dig because I think of the Iron Throne as a Weirwood throne symbol, though a dark one. But I like that. I like the vibe going on there.
It's kind of supposed to be like Naga's jaws, but like made out of weirwood. That's what I was aiming for.
Nice.
But then I wanted an actual like chair, so he could rest his tush, you know.
Well, yeah, it would be hard to sit on spikes. I mean, as the Targaryens know, it is difficult to sit on a throne made out of sharp things.
Yes.
So then there's a great question. Game of Theories with Marie, who's got an awesome YouTube channel, asks, do I think Night's King will be a green seer in the books? So I have said this a few times, that I think the show kind of got something right when they showed Night's King confronting Bran inside of his Weirwood vision. I think that if there is such a thing as the Night's King in the books that still exists, which I'm not sure of, it will only be as a spirit inside the Weirwood net. And I very much like the idea that either Night's King or Night's Queen or both still live inside the Weirwood net, and they are the force that raises the whites and animates the others from inside the Weirwood net, essentially. And that there's some sort of division in the Weirwood net, that there's a half that the Green Seers and Bloodraven and the Living live in, and there's half of it that the others have essentially frozen and corrupted and made habitable for themselves. And that's where we'll find Night's King, and that eventually we will have to see the Hellhounds fight inside the Weirwood net, which will be Bran and or Jon, obviously, taking on whatever Azor Ahai Night's King spirit is lurking in there still. So I'm a big fan of this theory. I hope that my symbolic research leads me increasingly in that direction. I'll know more as I sort of follow certain themes and stuff. But I think that's a real good possibility. You guys, what do you think of that tinfoil?
I love it.
Me too.
I like
It's
it.
the final battle. Do-do-do-do.
Under the sea. It'll be under the sea, the final battle.
Oh my god. It's going to be awesome.
This is looking pretty fab.
You know, I'm like super mesmerized just by like the tiny little square of like a video that I have on. It's just like,
If I talk, I think it goes to my screen sometimes.
yep.
Yeah, mainstream hypocrisy is following up on their question, saying maybe a soul-drinking sword could simply be a way to move the soul from one place to another. Yeah, maybe Azor Ahai was trying to give Nissa eternal life, and putting her in the sword for a minute was just part of the thing. Just trust me, babe. Just trust me. I know it's going to be weird, but...
So is this like Anakin stuff? Like
maybe.
Darth Vader trying to make sure that his wife lives forever,
It could be.
only to have her die. Okay.
There's
So
a lot
then,
of-
okay, so mainstream. I'm sorry, I'll give it right back to you. But she says, or not she, but whoever mainstream hypocrisy is, perhaps you could pull a sword from a tree, stab it into a person, and then have taken a soul from the tree to inject in the host, or vice versa. You could stab the tree with Lightbringer and put Nissa in there. Who knows, man? Who knows? Maybe we'll see some of this crazy stuff happen in A Dream for Spring, but we'll have to see.
I mean, is that not just the same thing as talking about like when you sacrifice to the Weirwood, if their throat is cut, the idea of like the person's soul being in their blood and the blood pouring into the ground and then the Weirwood soaking it up and then absorbing their soul? I mean, and
Yeah.
you could talk about then like if the sword could be symbolically understood as the thing that transferred the life from the body to the tree, because without the cut, then the soul would not have left the body and got into the tree. So
True. So even if it's not literally happening, it's happening in
Symbolically.
symbolism terms. Yeah, cool. Amanda, what were you going to say?
I was just going to mention that there, and it does, you guys were talking about swords and women a little bit earlier, but I was just going to mention that there's a lot of personification of swords being women, and so it's kind of like a hinting at, maybe this sword being maybe this essence is actually a woman's essence. So you got like Lady Forlorn and, Corbray, who says, she has a thirst, and there's a lot of personification of the sword as a woman. Then you have the Dornishman's wife, the song, The Dornishman's Wife, and, her what was it?
the steel kissed.
Yeah, like something about it. No, nobody could withstand her kiss, and there's a lot of personification of in the series with swords and women. So I don't know. There's
Well, I
something
definitely
there.
think like steel kiss, woman's kiss is something that Martin plays with a lot. The idea of like a sword giving a kiss to somebody in the same way that like you're saying, the way a maiden kisses someone is a sword kissing someone. Only one of them kills you and the other one hopefully doesn't. I mean, unless she's wearing poison lipstick.
Exactly.
Yep, Lady
And
Forlorn, Widow's Wail. And a Widow's Wail, of course, gives us the idea of Nissa Nissa's very scream becoming a sword that punctures the moon. So there's definitely...
Even Lightbringer. If Lightbringer did drink, if Nissa's soul went into Lightbringer, Lightbringer would be a female sword.
Yeah, it was warm as she was warm. It's warm with her fire. So absolutely.
Dark Sister.
Yeah,
Sister,
good
yeah.
one. Yep.
Yeah. Which, of course, Bloodraven took into the Weirwood Net.
We know that now.
Or into the Weirwood Cave, at least.
In the Weirwood Cave.
Yeah, that's the funny layer to it. Is I was standing right behind Ashea and Aziz in line when Ashea asked George Martin about Dark Sister, and he's like, "Yep, Bloodraven's got it," and everyone's like, "Oh, cool," and I'm like, "Oh, another dragon locked in ice." Immediately, that's what I'm like, of course it's in there. It has to be in there,
Where else would it be?
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. So Gretchen, starting with you, why don't you tell everyone where we can find more of your work? You're quickly growing with fondness in the hearts of myth heads everywhere as you share your wisdom with us. And I'll definitely be having you on again many times in the future. So tell everyone where they can find both your writing and your podcasting.
So I am the managing editor and a contributor over at thefundamentals.com, where I mostly do nerdy media analysis of all kinds. I have a personal website, gnellis.com, that I need to update. And very soon I have essays coming for a lot of my Song of Ice and Fire stuff, because I currently have like 20 pages of notes that actually need to become a thing that is actually a coherent series. So that will come soon.
Cool. Well, I'll be happy to have you on for sure to talk about them as you put them out, and
nice.
I'm sure they'll make me think and stuff. So
yeah,
we'll have you talk about it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and for podcasts, I am also the host of the Fundamentalist, nerdy media podcast, and also History is Gay, which is a queer history podcast. So that's where you can find me. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you, Gretchen. Amanda, of course, we all have subscribed to the Disputed Lands by now, but what do you got? What's your next video going to be? Tell everyone.
So my next video is going to be focusing on the Dothraki Sea and what the landscape might have been thousands of years ago, and we'll be discussing the Fisher Queens, who's Mai, and maybe a couple other things that might relate to that. So be on the lookout for that.
That sounds cool. Yes. Huzor Amai, Azor High, something. What was his name? I'm not sure. And he was, his born from the last of the Fisher Queens, which screams aquatic goddess. So yeah, we know what's going on here. It's going to be some Azor High parallel symbolism and Silver Sea is good stuff. The Moon Mirror Sea, as I call it. So yeah, looking forward to that one. We might have to do some follow-up chatting about that, I'm sure. And Senrixian, one more time. Let's look at our glorious Great King.
Here he is.
Nice with his wooden shoes.
Nice.
There's the far wide shot so you can see everything.
Nice.
I love it.
I want to clean it up a little bit more, and then I'll post it on Twitter. And we'll probably get a print in the shop. It's kind of a weird size. I might have to crop it a little bit.
Oh.
But
If you print that, I will buy it. Oh my gosh.
Yes. And you
know what I could see Sanrixian is like a frame, like a scrollwork frame that's like Weirwood and has hidden shit in it or something. If you want to fucking vamp out and go that far.
Yeah, to make it a good size, that would be a good idea.
Yeah, it's always a good way to change the orientation or the the dimensions. That's what I was looking for.
Resolution.
Cool. Well, I love it. Thank you for treating us with your
Of
work
course.
as always.
And you can find me at Sanrixian on Twitter. Hit me up anytime there. Right now, I currently have commissions closed, but I do have a web store. It's sanrixian.com, and you can get a 15% off code with LML. And yeah, that's what I got going on.
Cool, guys. And as I mentioned before, my next episode will be Weirwood Compendium 5, Sea of Green Fire. It'll either be next week or the week after. I am still working on moving and stuff, so it's possible I might need to take a week off somewhere in here. Everything's a little bit fluid, but you know how it is. I'll put out the notifications when we're ready to rock. If you want to support Mythical Astronomy, please go to lucifermeanslightbringer.com and click on the Patreon tab, or search for Lucifer Means Lightbringer on the Patreon website. And you can also go to paypal.me/mythicalastronomy to make an easy one-time donation. And you don't need PayPal. It's super easy. And yeah, because some people do prefer to do a one-time thing. But all of that stuff is super appreciated. Keeps me going. Allows me to buy new stuff when one computer burns out or things happen. You know, my wig gets too scraggly. I could buy a new wig or whatever, you know. So appreciate that, guys. I'm always looking to try to bring you more material and stuff. And oh, here's the big announcement. I have created a new Between Two Weirwoods YouTube channel and podcast feed. I think it was confusing everyone. I was throwing in Mythical Astronomy scripted episodes, Mythical Astronomy live panels and live stuff, and then the Between Two Weirwoods panels. And there were some people just didn't know what was happening anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and split all that off. Plus, you guys know I had the problem with the YouTube monetization. I figure if I have two YouTube channels, then if one gets screwed up, I can just, you know, stream from the other or whatever. So on YouTube, it's very easy to find. It's Between #2 Weirwoods with no spaces, just Between Two Weirwoods. And I'll drop the link here in just a second. So go ahead and subscribe, because you need to get notifications when I do Between Two Weirwoods panels. And you will only get that if you are subscribed to the Between Two Weirwoods channel. So make sure you go do that if you like discussion panels that we've been having. And of course, Gretchen will be on one of those very soon. And so will Sanrixian. We're going to talk about religion with Brendan Beefish. And then, of course, Amanda's been on there, and she'll be back too. So, yeah, Melanie Lot 7 found the link. Thank you very much. So, yep, everybody go sub to Between Two Weirwoods, and I'll see you again either next week or in 2 weeks with Weirwood Compendium 5, Sea of Green Fire. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Sanrixian. Thanks, Gretchen.
Yeah,
and
thanks for having me.
Enjoy your Sunday, everybody.
Bye.
Hi, guys.